legislation located.
All right, good morning, everybody.
Can you all hear me? Morning. Bear with me. This will be my first meeting as chairman, so apologies for missteps or anything like that while I kind of get familiar with the procedure. First, we will call to order and establish quorum, so I will have Cassie do a roll call.
Yeah, there is feedback. We'll close the doors, and I bet that'll help.
That should help. Okay.
Yeah.
Adam Austin,
Present.
Blake Cantrell,
Present.
Brian Duzan,
Here.
Christy Edelin,
Here.
Mike Irvin, Brian Hendershot, Wesley Holloway, Philip Jarena,
Present.
Michael Leake,
Present.
Carolyn Nelson,
Present.
Norma Sapp, Mel Woodrow. We have quorum.
All right, next on the agenda is a consideration and approval of the meeting minutes from the September 13th meeting. Can I call for a motion and a second to approve?
I'll make a motion to approve as written. And second.
And then as opposed to doing yay and nay, we're going to actually take a down the roll vote for this session. So I'll defer to Cassie on that.
Adam Austin,
Yay.
Blake Cantrell,
Yay.
Brian Duzan,
Yes.
Mike Irvin, yes. Christy Edelin,
Yes.
Wesley Holloway,
Yes.
Philip Jarena, yes. Michael Leake,
Yes.
Carolyn Nelson.
It's Caroline.
Caroline, I'm so sorry, Caroline.
That's okay. Yes.
Motion carries.
All right, next up will be a program update from Director Barry. Director Barry?
Thank you, Blake. Just going to give a really quick update since we just saw each other a mere few weeks ago. But high level, we do have a couple of new employees on our leadership staff that I want to introduce. The first is Deputy Director Barrett Brown. Barrett started a few weeks ago. He's handling all of our legislative affairs. He's our legislative liaison. He's already hired a couple of policy analysts to come work on staff to work on rules year-round and explore what other states have done and do that research that's necessary for the rulemaking process. He came from Senate Pro Tem Treat's office. Before that, he was on Governor Fallon's staff, and before that, he was an assistant DA in Oklahoma County. So he has some good experience behind him, and we're really lucky to have him on staff. Barrett, would you like to say anything? Next, we have Fonda Manuel. She is our new Director of Compliance, and we are so happy to have her on staff. She started yesterday, so she has, she's drinking from a fire hose, but she's already, 2 days ago. I forgot what day it is. Started Monday, but she's already had some fantastic ideas and has jumped in and is working with our team over there and already doing an amazing job. Fonda comes from the oil and gas industry, where she worked in a highly regulated industry and understands the regulatory, how to work within a regulatory agency. She also worked at OESC, so the unemployment agency, and she worked during the height of the many, many complaints and unemployment problems. So she's really experienced in setting up processes to solve problems. So really happy to have you, Fonda. Do you want to say anything?
I'm just excited to be here. It's a big challenge, and I'm up for it. I feel like I'm back in college training for finals, but yeah, I'm excited, and I'm really impressed with the team. That's one thing. I don't know if you know the compliance team, but that's been I am really impressed with the people I'm going to be able to work with. So I'm excited to be here.
Awesome. And just a note, will you make sure to speak on the microphone if you speak. Anybody in the room, please make sure to speak. That way Caroline can hear us and anyone online can hear us.
Could you repeat her name? Sorry, for your name.
It's Fonda, Fonda, Manuel, Fonda Manuel.
A couple of other high-level things. We started a cohort of trainees on Monday to come in and be compliance and lab inspectors. So we're going to plan to start new cohorts every couple of weeks so we can get enough compliance officers on staff to get out and make sure we're inspecting every single licensee. And we do have a goal of inspecting every licensee by next December. So December 2022, and we'll keep you up to date on that. I think we'll have kind of a visual to keep you all up to date on where we are on inspections. Other than that, we are, business as usual, keeping going every single day. There's always something. We are lucky and incredibly lucky that Dr. Williams chose to stay on staff with us. She is our director of operations, so she is still right in the mix and helping with all of the day-to-day activities at OMMA. And along with that, she is here to help answer questions as they arise as we go through the rules. So thank you, Dr. Williams. And am I missing anything? I think that's it. We do have a couple of new board members. Blake, do you want to introduce them or do you want me to? Okay, so Wesley Holloway, thank you for joining us. And I believe you represent, you have a grow, is that correct?
Several different companies move it vertical. So.
Will you make sure that push the button so it turns green? There you go.
Yes, we have a vertical. So processing, extraction, finished product manufacturing, and distro and transport as well.
Okay, great. Glad to have you. And then let's see, I think that, oh, and Caroline Nelson, yes, she is here from ODAF, so Department of Ag. Caroline, do you want to make any comments?
No, I mean, if people have questions about hemp or bees, just let me know.
Awesome, thank you. Okay, I think that's it.
On the program update, out of curiosity, are we still working towards a new Complia system, or is that kind of on the back burner now?
A new licensing system? No, it is not on the back burner. We are in the midst of the switchover. I don't know, Dr. Williams will give an update on that.
So we are working towards our new licensing system, the Thentia system. What we are doing and why it's taking so long is because we wanted to make sure that on the regulator side, it was really tightened up so that our staff would not be able to miss any rejection reasons during that first application submission. So we're making sure that the system meets much higher standards than we had originally anticipated needing them to make changes for. So we're just trying to make sure everything is good. We should be 4 to 6 weeks out from launch. You'll get a lot of communication as that comes up because we want to make sure everyone is comfortable with the system, knows how to regain access to the system. But I will just say that if for any reason your email address in our Complia system is not up to date, please make sure that it is so that you will be able to regain access to the new system when we do make that switch.
Is that the same one as the new OBN?
Yes.
All right, next up we have a discussion on the recommendations for the emergency rules. Before we jump into it, did want to put an idea to the board that Director Berry had proposed, which is to kind of expedite these meetings moving forward. I think kind of the way that it shook out was the proposal is, in a week or two prior to the next meeting, myself, along with Cassie, would, prepare a list of items that we can probably rubber stamp and pass statutory, that we don't have any ability to make recommendations on, et cetera, as everybody's okay with just, passing them as written. And then a separate list in that email of items that do need discussion to help kind of make these meetings more efficient as opposed to going line by line, which is the way that we have been doing it. So I'd like to call for a motion and a second to approve this idea moving forward with the details to be firmed up.
I'll make such a motion.
And I'll second.
Whenever you're ready, Cassie, would you mind doing a roll call vote, please?
Adam Austin,
Yes.
Blake Cantrell,
Yes.
Brian Duzan,
Yes.
Christy Edelin,
Yes.
Mike Irvin, Wesley Holloway,
Yes.
Philip Drina,
Yes.
Michael Leek,
Yes.
and Caroline Nelson.
Yes.
Motion passes.
Director Barry, for this meeting, was there anything you wanted to add to that?
No, I think that's great. What we'll try to do, even going through the changes today, is point out at the beginning of each section if this is directly coming from a statute or from the legislature, so that everyone in here knows that that's why we made those changes. And then if it's a policy change that is not directly from statute, we will point that out as well, so we can have more discussion on that.
So just one quick question, and Mr. Chairman, I'm assuming that the exact language would be taken from statute and applied to rules, and that's what we would be passing in this, what I'm going to call a consent docket. Is that
Sure.
Is that a fair statement?
So essentially, one of the items that would be on the, pass as is, so to speak, consent list, as you say, would be those that are statutory and we have no authority to offer recommendations on. So I think that answers your question. I don't know that we would have an involvement in codifying statute into the rules. We would just, make note of the rules that did come from statutory language that are out of our purview. Is that?
Mr. Chair, do you mind if Cameron answers?
Oh, of course.
Or helps?
So, I think I was on the same page as you, though. But yeah, if it's going to come straight from statute, just to expedite this process, it's something that it's not really going to be able to change because we don't have the ability to change it in our rules in ways to conflict with statute.
I think he's just asking, do we take it straight from statute? Like we're going to copy and paste, basically.
A lot of times we do. It just depends on the circumstance.
To be clear, in case I wasn't, the email with the list of items for discussion and, items pass as is, it would be open for the board's feedback. Some of them we wouldn't be able to take off of the pass as is statutory as we're talking about, but that email would be intended for you all to give feedback if you do want to discuss some of the items that are on the pass as is list.
Right. And clearly, when statute has been enacted, then there is no latitude for an agency to diverge from that. However, then agencies do pass rules to say how they're going to implement that statute. And I was just trying to confirm and clarify that we are talking about the exact statutory language that was passed and not the implementation policies of that statute.
Correct. That's exactly what we're talking about. So if there is a piece that the legislature gave us the authority to create an implementation plan, that would be on the list for discussion because that wouldn't be direct from statute. Yes.
Any other questions or comments? Thank you. All right, so with that, I guess we should begin our review. So I will just kind of go down the list in order, line by line, as we've said, which we're hoping to expedite moving forward. And I'll just pause briefly after each for any comment, discussion, recommendations, etc. Okay, so page 1, 68112, section D, address change. Definitional section 310-68114, definition of actively operating or actively conducting business operations.
So the definition of actively operating, that's going to be from previous emergency rules that are being added into these emergency rules. The only new changes that this board hasn't reviewed are going to be what's been highlighted into the rules.
Got it. My fault. Again, a little grace. Thank you. Okay, so that would then mean that we are on the definition of dispensary on page 3, or commercial dispensary. Definition of dispose or disposal.
And just to let y'all know, disposal, that definition comes straight from statute in 63 OS 428.1.
Yeah, please.
Okay. Here, just to start off with dispensary. So all we did with dispensary, this comes from statute, that dispensaries are now able to do non-infused pre-rolls. So we're just adding that to the definition. And that's in 63 OS 421D. And then disposal, also straight from statute. And so we didn't do anything different to that. All right. The next change was for grower. This also shows that growers are now able to do non-infused pre-rolls. And so we just added that ability right there in statute, and that it can't exceed 1 gram. So that comes from 63 OS 422E. Next change.
Real quick, I do have a question. It says net weight. How's that calculated? Is that anywhere else in the rules?
Yeah, that's just the statutory language that we just added.
Okay, thanks.
Okay. The next change was harvest batch. Essentially, it used to be 10-pound harvest batches. Statute changed that, so it changed all batch sizes. So what we just did to make it clear is that it shouldn't exceed what is allowable under our new rule that provides for batch sizes in 8-1. And so 8-1B will explain exactly what those sizes are.
I've had several questions on that, but I think we'll discuss that when we get to 310-681-81B, and then we can discuss that at that point and make sure that I am clear on what those limits actually are. But
yeah.
I think I understand them.
Yeah, that sounds good. All right, the next change. So statute now provides for 2 types of processor licenses, a hazardous and a non-hazardous processor license. So we needed to define those 2 types of processor license, and basically how we define that was based on what is chemicals that are considered hazardous by OSHA Hazard Communication Standard under 29 CFR 1910.1200.
Are these going to be tracked differently in the database, whichever one we end up getting, so that the inspectors kind of have some idea what they're going to walk into before they get there?
Yes. And so I think overall the intent here is to look at what the processor's doing, where they're going to be using those processing activities, and make sure they're not using dangerous substances in potentially like a residential area.
Is butane considered a hazardous?
It is.
Okay.
And just to let y'all know, the 29 CFR 1910.1200, every chemical will let you know if it's hazardous on that chemical safety data sheet. So that's how you'll be able to determine if it's hazardous under that CFR.
Do we have any idea about timeline or kind of, implementation of that? Would that be done upon license renewal? You selected one of the 2, or can you speak to that yet?
Yes, so we are authorized to begin this process beginning November 1, but we will probably launch this with the new licensing system because our existing system doesn't support these 2 separate streams of license types. but the way that it's written, as you renew your license or if you apply for a new license after we launch these two different streams, then that's when that will come into effect. So if you've got an existing license at that time, you'll make that distinction at renewal.
Thank you.
All right, moving on. The next change that we have is for infused pre-roll. So now, as discussed earlier, growers and dispensaries are now authorized to do non-infused pre-rolls. By that, we had to define non-infused and infused pre-rolls to kind of differentiate what they are and are not allowed to do. And so,
On this one, other ingredients, what's intended to be captured by that? It just seems kind of broad.
yeah, so to look at this, also I would look at non-infused pre-roll because in that definition, so essentially an infused pre-roll is going to be anything that's not a non-infused pre-roll. And so a non-infused pre-roll will only be flour, shake, trim, unflavored paper, a filtered tip, or cone. So any other ingredients besides those are going to be a infused pre-roll.
Same issue with the non-infused. Is the intent to basically just meaning in the internal composition, like not to mean packaging or anything like that?
Right.
Were you wanting to say something, Dr. Williams? Okay, sure. I just feel like in both definitions, on infused and non-infused, or other ingredients in the case of infused, or any other ingredients in the case of non-infused, is pretty broad. I'm just trying to clarify what's intended to be captured there. Like what's trying to be excluded with this.
Okay, I was just going. So anything that's not these specific things. So literally, if you're adding anything else, any other ingredients.
What about packaging? Would that be considered?
So packaging, I would say, is not considered. That's not.
Is that clear in the regs that it's not to be considered an ingredient to the
I mean, we
final
would have
form
to
product?
clarify all of our products since say packaging.
Okay. 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 Thank you.
All right, the next change is inventory tracking system. This came from statute and then also from previous rules, just merging the definition together to make sure that it's all-encompassing.
And I'm going to authorize Cameron to move kind of quickly through these since y'all have had them in your hands for 30 days. So we'll just kind of raise your hand if you have an issue. Otherwise, we're going to roll through.
Okay, great. So the next one we have is Keef. Statute required that Keef is not allowed unless otherwise authorized by the department. And so we have defined Keef and then authorized it in the testing standards. The next change is going to be a material change. We kind of discussed this last time. This is from statute as well, authorizing us to charge fees for material changes. So the next one will be non-hazardous processor license. Kind of like hazardous processor license, a non-hazardous processor license just means that any processor that will not perform any processing or extraction methods that are determined hazardous by that OSHA standard, or using chemicals that are determined hazardous by that OSHA standard. And then again, there's that definition of non-infused pre-roll that we just discussed. The next change is going to be non-liquid medical marijuana product. Under the batch sizes, the statute refers to concentrates, non-liquid medical marijuana products, and then finished medical marijuana products. So we kind of had to define each to help clarify what is going to come under each batch size. And so this is going to include non-liquid concentrates, essentially. Not the finished product, because there's going to be another definition for a finished medical marijuana product. The next change I have is the definition of private school. House Bill 2646 struck out preschool. So this is for dispensaries being within 1,000 feet of a school. Preschools are no longer included in that definition. The next change we have is for processor license, just making it clear that there are now two types of processor license, hazardous and non-hazardous. Okay. The next change we have is production batch. So we added, to make it clear that because of the statute, we added non-liquid medical marijuana products to the first part, and then we added, and then finished medical marijuana products are going to be the part B of the production batch. So just clarifying with the changes in statute. Okay. No questions there. The next change was for public school. Again, striking out preschool per House Bill 2646. After that, we struck out and/or the Oklahoma Tax Commission from the definition of registered to conduct business. This came from statute as well. So essentially, you don't have to go to the tax commission prior to getting your license. The next definition was, again, another change almost straight from statute, and it's a change to remediation. Okay. The next change we had was changing the definition of strain. This, again, came from statute, from House Bill 2646.
Is the entire verbiage statutory?
Yeah.
Because appearance is, in my opinion, a loophole.
Okay.
Like appearance is too subjective to be. Because basically people could use the appearance as, a loophole to apply it across the board to anything. Yeah. It's just a really subjective standard to be.
Also, do you guys have a definition for variety that you use? Because I don't see one.
For what?
For variety, you said the name given to a particular variety of medical marijuana. So I was just curious if you guys actually have a definition for what OMA considers a variety.
So we do not have a definition.
Okay. With people I see breeding hemp, a lot of times they'll just cross things and then name it something, and they'll call it either a strain or variety, when that's not really factual. It takes a long time to create stable genetics. So that just might be something to maybe look at, is providing a definition or using a current definition that the state has for what a variety is.
Would you like to make a recommendation to that effect?
Well, I'm sure I can find one in the ODAF rules and stuff that would define what a variety is. So if you give me a minute, I can send it through the chat.
I think we will take your recommendation, and you don't have to find the definition right now. We can follow up with you, Caroline.
Okay.
Thank you.
Is it possible to change the word variety to cultivar? I feel that would take care of it.
So I will say y'all are free to make recommendations. Just know that this does come from statute, but if you want to make a recommendation of things, that you're absolutely free to make them to us, and we'll evaluate, but just know that statute language is that. All right, keep moving. All right, the next changes are going to be on page 12. There's several different definitions there. If you'll go down just a little bit more. All these are just statutory changes reflecting the fact that now laboratories, research facilities, and education facilities now receive a complementary license with their license, or complementary transport license with their license. Okay, the next change is page 15. So this is just, again, statutory language changing, and that change comes straight from 420M, or 63 OS 420M. Next change is going to be on page 22. So statute now struck out any language regarding a hearing right once a physician terminates a patient license. So basically, there's no right to hearing and the license becomes immediately null and void. And this again comes from statute change.
I got a question. Is there an actual termination form somewhere for the physicians to use?
Yes, there is. We should.
That is on our website, and that is another change we are hoping to make to the licensing system, if we're able to have a login for physicians so that they can keep records of their referrals.
Okay, perfect. Thank you.
I have a quick question about the previous. Is there a way for a patient to fight their null and void card?
So with this striking a hearing right, that would strike out their ability to challenge it through the APA process. Also, there's always the ability to get another physician recommendation.
Okay, so they could get another physician. Okay, thank you.
Cameron, I had a quick question on the patient license reprint. Is this statutory language again? So you don't have to go through GTARB or anything like that to get the fee approved? Okay.
Thank you. The next change is going to be page 25. So this again came straight from statute, just making it clear that you can have a transfer between businesses that are licensed to operate the same physical address. It doesn't have to go through the transportation. It's just a clarification straight from statute and a necessary one. And then further down, again, just recognizing that laboratories, research facilities, and education facilities have that standalone transporter license. And so these changes will be made throughout subchapter 3. And so there will be a lot of highlighted portions that I'm just going to go ahead and work through. But anytime you see those, that is why. Page 27, statute also authorized to charge for reprint fees for transporter agents. And so those also will be $20, just like a transporter or a patient license reprint fee.
I do have kind of a procedural question. Since we're doing something that involves fees, typically you can't invoke laws that have fees if the legislature is not in session. But since this is coming from the legislature, that's okay.
So yeah, that is the justification that it comes. So typically you can't do fees just on your own, changing fees. But since it's specifically from statute.
Okay, thank you.
Can I ask one more question? I'm sorry to go backwards.
Oh, you're all right.
Is a technical school considered elementary, middle, or high school, or would it be considered higher ed? They just
you're going way back on me.
No, I'm sorry. They just didn't specifically mention it.
Okay.
What do you mean by technical school? Like, do you mean BOTEC or do you mean like Tulsa Welding School?
Okay. So like Tulsa Tech or Indian Nation's capital or whatever the tech school is here.
So typically those have not fallen under the definition of school for us. Okay. And so it's typically applied to the elementary, middle, private school, or in high school type situations.
Thank you.
Those secondary educations have not fallen
I
under
appreciate that. Thank you.
Okay, the next change is going to be on page 29. So throughout statute, it has changed the records retention from multiple different years to all 7 years to keep it consistent. And so we've tried to do that throughout our rules as well. The next change was to that G right there. If you go up just a little bit. So this one comes from a change in statute that struck a phrase that you cannot alter but for the signature or after departing the originating license premise, but for the signature, and then one other area. But there was also the issue of, well, what happens if you have these refusals to accept, and because that's technically going to be changing and documented onto the manifest. And so what we've done is to account for those situations while also not allowing it to be completely 100% open to make any change to a manifest after you depart from the premise, because there's some concerns there.
So a grow or processing facility delivers to a dispensary, and all of it is rejected and returned. I get that. What happens when it is partially rejected or returned? How do we handle that?
So this updated language makes it clear that you're able to make those kinds of changes. It's hopefully this addresses specifically a partial delivery rejection, that you're able to indicate which items have been rejected on that manifest so that you have documentation of which items you did receive into your business.
So for clarity, in 2B, a complete inventory of the medical marijuana products being returned, that's just meaning a complete inventory of only those products being returned. Okay, thank you.
Okay. So the next change then is going to be, that's just crossing out what we just talked about, and it's just putting it under a different area to clarify, but still you have that documentation requirement. Okay. Page 32, this change comes from 63 OS 426.1, that essentially once a certificate of compliance is properly submitted, showing full compliance, an additional one is not needed unless there is a change of use or occupancy or additional inspection is needed.
This came from statute.
This came from statute, correct. And then,
so a certificate of compliance by any other name, does that fall under certificate of compliance if they call it a license or if they call it some other name? How is that to be addressed?
so there's different parts under statute that allow like a letter or a resolution to meet the requirements for the certificate of compliance, and so we would treat those all as, if it met the certificate of compliance requirements, then those would all still fall under that.
Many authorities having jurisdiction do not actually provide any true services for a certificate of compliance. They merely provide a letter saying they do not provide those services.
Yeah.
So this could be called a license fee or a contact fee, or you name the sort of fee that it could be called, but it is in fact a certificate of compliance by another name.
Mike makes a good point.
How is that going to be treated?
That's a great point. We've seen them kind of construed as occupancy or use or any other verbiage, but fundamentally they're the same thing. Would it be wise to make a recommendation to define certificate of compliance? Is that permissible, given that this is statutory?
If y'all would like, I think that's.
Isn't there already a statutory definition? Or are you?
There's not a statutory definition, but there are specific things listed in statute. Yeah.
Okay, so there are things listed in statute that would make something equal a certificate of compliance. So I think what Cameron's saying is if it's a letter.
Yeah, that it would.
Because we do receive those from some counties. We consider that county's letter to us saying, we don't issue certificates of compliance, but we'll give you this letter. But we count it as a certificate of compliance.
And rather than making a recommendation, I was just asking for clarity about how the department viewed that situation.
Yeah, we count it as a, yeah, because every county does it differently.
So I just do have a question about how this will function. So how does this work on renewals? Will it just disappear as a required document in Complia, or how does that work? Because right now I can't submit an application without it. So is November 1 hard line that goes away, or just out of curiosity, how's it being implemented?
I mean, functionally, that would be the easiest route for all of us, and we're building that into the new system, and we'll make sure that there's something on our side for the existing Complia system between November 1 and launch of the new system.
What about the apps that are in queue? If they are reviewed after November 1, will that certificate of compliance be just ignored, or how will that work?
Cameron, correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe it's the date that the application or renewal was submitted determines how it's processed.
So if it were to be rejected and then resubmitted, it would no longer need the COC. Is that correct?
Cameron, do you know the answer to that? I'm not sure that we've thought through that specifically, but
The reason I ask is because I am in that situation. I'm just curious how this looks in 2 weeks.
Yeah, so I think that's something that we'd still need to just discuss before making a definitive statement there. All right, and again, this is that material change that's permitted through, that's required by statute for any late renewals. And I think we discussed this last time as well.
Can you clarify the difference between not renewed, rejected, all these different variations of a license surrender, so to speak? Just a little unclear on, because they're used throughout, but seemingly at times in different ways. So can you guys shed some light on that for us?
Right. So the question was the difference between rejected, not renewed, and those kinds of statuses for a license.
Right, like the end of this section 6, if it's been expired for more than 90 days, it shall not be renewed.
So
it's not renewed, what's expired, what's all these different.
Cameron, you're welcome to jump in unless.
Okay, so rejected is going to be you've submitted something and the documentation hasn't met the exact requirements, so it gets rejected, sent back to the other, or to the licensee or the applicant. Expired means the license is expired. And then we have denied means that a license is not even sent back to the licensee to be able to correct the application submission. It's actually denied, and if it's a renewal, it has to go through a hearing process. Or if it's not a renewal, it's cut off. And so you lose that $2,500 fee.
So if a license were to be not renewed, you could not reapply.
So typically
that's how it reads. I'm just clarifying.
Yeah. So in non-renewal is just the process. So you've been issued your license, and then after the first year, you go through a renewal process. So if you choose not to renew it in time, then typically that would become an expired license. However, this is providing a mechanism to where they can bring the license essentially back to life by paying a $500 fee.
And if this helps to clarify, basically, if you've not done that within 90 days, you would not have the opportunity to then go back and renew. And if you wanted to regain a license, you'd have to start over, new license number, new permits, new everything.
Okay, so what would be the term for a license being terminated, quote unquote, with prejudice? Like, cannot get it back in any circumstance?
So I'd say there's a lot more to that question. So that's going to be a revocation typically.
Okay. You understand why I'm asking? There's eight terms that kind of mean the same thing.
Yeah.
Just trying to clarify which ones are the, most impactful
So when
negatively on a licensee.
Yeah, when we take action, it's going to be a revocation. And there's also per statute, which we'll go through here in a little bit in 427.14, a bad actor requirement. Then once you fall under that, that's when you'll be with prejudice of being able to get another license.
Thank you very much.
I also wanted to clarify that the 90-day clock, let's see, that is for expiration. So I guess I'm trying to clarify that all of these clocks are talking about the initial application or the initial renewal application. So the renewal application has to be filed prior to expiration. But the authority has 90 days to approve. So along the way, it could be rejected for various and sundry reasons. Some document has not been supplied, whatever. Now that goes beyond 90-day expiration period where it says it shall not be renewed. That only accounts or only talks about the initial renewal application, correct? Not the entire process of getting it renewed. Am I accurate in that statement?
Yes, you're accurate in as far as it's not accounting to that entire process. I wouldn't say it's only the initial renewal or initial license, but as far as if you properly submit a renewal application and that goes through the process and is passed, that's not what this is applying to. This is only applying to when they do not renew as required and they want to try to get their license back. Yeah.
So they apply on 10 days after their license has expired. Then for whatever reason it takes the authority 90 days to do it, they would still be eligible for that initial renewal because they applied for renewal prior to the 90-day clock expiring.
Right, so they would be eligible to pay this fee and to and try to get that license, that same license number back and renewed. Yes.
I was certain that's the way it was, but I did just want to clarify.
Yeah, that's great
I know I have a hard time making myself clear sometimes, especially in these instances, but thank you for your answer.
Yeah. Okay. Sorry, what page are we on? 33. I went way up there. So that was talking about the reinstatement of renewals, and now this change is talking about the material change request. And if you have a material change, the statute said that we shall charge a fee for that material change, and so just to keep that consistent with the reinstatement fee, it's the $500 non-refundable fee.
How do we notify?
So any ownership changes or you're changing locations, any type of change like that with a license, there is a form you submit with the application process.
This is in advance of so that material change request is needing to be submitted via Complia prior to any material change?
Right.
Or approval?
Right.
Through Complia?
Right. Or whatever system is in place at that time.
Do you guys have a list of what you consider a material change? So that way people know when they're supposed, like what change they should submit? Because you gave examples, which I would also consider material changes, but I don't know if you have anything else that you would consider a material change.
So we define material change as anything that would change or affect the qualifications for licensure. And so as any change that, if made, so as an owner, if an owner is being changed, that's going to affect their ability to get that license in the first place because you have the residency requirements. So there's specific changes that we do have listed in our rules, and those do typically tend to be location, ownership changes, and yeah, anything that would basically make us reprocess the entire license.
But we do have a definition.
Yes, we do have a definition.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome. The next change is page 37. So now our rules there's been a change in 2646 that essentially you have 30 days to resubmit a rejected application. And if you do not submit it within 30 days, first of all, if you do not submit it within 30 days, then that license application is lapsed. That's always been our rules. But now there's been a change to also state that if our application has been resubmitted but is still incomplete or contains errors that are not clerical or typographical in nature, then it's going to lead to a denial of the license.
Denial being the with prejudice form. Is that correct?
Yeah, so when you say with prejudice, this is different than a revocation where you may not be eligible for licensure later. This just means that your application effectively dies because those corrections have not been made, but you would be able to reapply for a new license at that location.
New license.
Correct, but that application
During
itself.
the pendency of that application, we cannot operate, effectively killing a business.
If you applied after the expiration date of your license, that is true. If you apply before your license expires, you are able to operate under your license while we review it. But then if you did not correct it, then yes, that application would die and that license would be lapsed and not eligible to operate.
Okay.
Does that answer the question?
Okay. There's some problems here with this one because, I understand and correct me, but the intent here presumably is to eliminate gamesmanship in rolling 30-day renewal licenses, yes? However, to be denied and for the business to have to shutter the doors for months pending new application and review is the death knell. Like, this will kill businesses. So it needs to be very, very tightly monitored in these circumstances. And I know that I've expressed this to Director Berry previously, but to give you an example, I don't know who's reviewing these applications, but I can tell you that I've gotten legal reasons for rejections that I fundamentally disagreed with, and in one case, literally reapplied with the exact same information and got it approved. The fact that these reviewers are not paralegals, they're not attorneys, they're reviewing legal documents and making legal determinations that fundamentally could kill businesses with this new regulation is a problem.
Yeah, so if it is a renewal, there is a hearing right. But I'm just going to make the point that this did come from statute. This is not specific from us in this rules. But also, I'm hearing your concerns, and I think that was specific. That's why it says unless the department determines otherwise, there's going to be situations that will come and be taken into account as well.
Statutory insofar as we cannot even make a recommendation to say in the very last sentence, in nature may be denied. I think flexibility is key here because shall is a mandate, and this is not black and white. And these are not legally trained people making legal decisions that, as I said, can kill my business. And that is a serious issue.
So I did oversimplify, and I apologize. There is a hearing right if there is an existing business for that denial. So there's a hearing right for existing businesses. So
same issue, though. Unless the license is considered active during that hearing, it's the same implication, the same damage.
Sorry, can you say that again?
I appreciate that there is a right to a hearing, but presumably the license is still suspended or revoked or whatever the terminology in this instance would be, and the business cannot operate. It has the same damage.
So the hearing right, we don't have the authority to lapse the license until we have that hearing.
Okay, so the license will remain
will be
active.
active until we have an order by a judge in that type of scenario.
And again, back to my question, can we not, shall is statutory?
So
We
that
can't
is-
make it may?
That's statutory. I think the flexibility here is going to be, oh, sorry, go ahead.
I think we were going to say the exact same thing. I think the latitude is unless the department determines otherwise. We have, and I think from what I understand in the industry, every single business out there has these issues. We sent 6 transportation agent licenses in, photographed with the same camera against the same wall. 5 of them were approved. 1 was denied because the wall wasn't white enough. We resubmitted that same application. We were rejected again because there were not enough pixels in the camera. Now, are those clerical or typographical errors that would not allow the denial of the license? I'm not sure, but I think there is wide latitude in that regard within the agency, and I would submit that is, given that is statutory, that is about all the latitude they're going to be able to get, and until the statute changes.
I've got a question. How often does this type of situation occur? Often, okay. And then since we do have concerns, and I agree with concerns of non-legal folks reviewing legal documents, so it says unless the department decides otherwise, who's the deciding factor here? Is it the non-lawyers, non-paralegals reviewing the records, or does it go up to Director Berry or Director Williams? So kind of, how does that handled?
So we are building out new training for our staff on that exact note to make sure that this is properly handled. There are going to be some things that are a little easier. If you are uploading a blank piece of paper instead of your COC and you're continuing to do so, that's a little bit easier, but that would still, any of these denials, I believe we're leaning towards those would all have to come through management at the very least and often be elevated to legal. I absolutely hear your concerns on rejections not being caught, not being consistent. And I'll just reiterate that is exactly why the launch of the new licensing system is taking so long, is because we want to build it in such a way that likelihood is reduced dramatically. And that will also come along with additional trainings, more regular retrainings. On top of the new licensing system, we're developing a quality assurance internal program for our licensing staff that will also lead to ongoing training programs. So when we see similar errors, often they're going to get retraining, the whole team. So we're redoing all of our processes to make sure that that's less likely. That starts with our licensing system. And one of the things we have discussed specifically is that if our staff misses a rejection reason on the first pass, that will not affect your eligibility to resubmit that application if that was an error on our part. So we're trying to address all of those things. So hearing your concerns today helps us build that out properly. So thank you.
Short answer, we're making sure that issues are elevated up to leadership pretty consistently.
I have a question. Do you guys have a timeline for when the training and things like that will be implemented?
Training on the new system?
Yes, ma'am.
The licensing system? We don't have dates yet. We're working on that. We'll put them out very soon, and we'll make sure to blast them on social media. You'll get an email. It'll be everywhere.
Okay, thank you.
Kind of piggybacking on that, and I appreciate that you guys are getting this training in place and that it's just a matter of time, really. But in the interim, given that this situation realistically could arise in 11 days, can we, I'd just like to make a suggestion that legalize or management or supervisory in some capacity reviews anything that is going to result in the suspension, forfeiture, et cetera, of a license, because this is gambling unintentionally with good intent, but unintentional consequences could have a lot of harm. So just please be very careful with these situations, because I would say it's a coin flip when I submit an application whether I get a reason that's real or not for the rejection. So thank you.
The only thing I would like to add is that OMMA is put in a difficult spot because you have a lot of people that are trying to do the right thing, that are trying to follow the rules, that then have to deal with their city, county to get the right paperwork, and then you go through all this. And then you have a lot of people, you use the word, I think, gamemanship. That's probably a little nice because there's a lot of people that do a lot to get around the rules. And so that's why they have to incorporate the word shall. But I think we're all on the same page that we don't want to be on the other side because, oh, well, we didn't get this form or that form, and it takes the city of Tulsa 3 months to do so that's a tough road that everybody's in a tough spot sometimes. So
I do have one more question, and I completely agree. It was a generous word, but that type of activity can and should now be enforced against. But, should there be a mistake or an appeal in a hearing, what happens to the other licenses? OBN's kind of tied to this. Do those licenses now become suspended? We have to follow a hearing and procedural through the other agencies. Are you all able to speak to that at all?
So as far as the other licenses, you mean like OBN registration?
Specifically OBN, because
Okay.
OBN is you have to have OMMA for OBN. So the impact on other licenses. Are you guys able to speak to that at all?
I mean, that would be a better question for OBN, but did you have?
I just want to reiterate your point earlier and correct me if I'm saying any of this wrong. During that court proceeding, we are not able to fully lapse that license until that hearing is complete. So until then, you would have an operational OMMA license. Is that correct, Cameron?
That's correct.
Okay, thank you.
Your concerns are valid and heard, though, Blake, so we will discuss those internally.
All right. Page 38. So just adding language that was added to 63 OS 427.6 that we can do 2 on-site inspections to monitor compliance or ensure qualifications for licensure. This is straight from statute. The next one is also straight from statute, 63 OS 427.22, that department may share confidential information to assist other agencies in ensuring compliance with applicable laws. This does not include patient information, which is sealed records. That was page 38. And we're moving. The next changes are page 48.
Cameron, I got a quick question on that. And I know we're talking about not sending patient records over. I know we've had talked ad nauseum about the issues we have at the physician licensing boards and investigating cases where docs might be sitting in a dispensary and doing medical marijuana recommendation forms or leaving blank forms. I've had a case referred by OMMA to us for investigation, but then we can't get any help from OMMA in investigating. So unfortunately, what we do is just close your case that you referred to us. So is there any, and I know we have a new political liaison, is there any activity being made to try and help the licensing boards investigate physicians who are inappropriately making marijuana recommendations? And I can tell you, too, the physician in particular we investigated cooperated with us because they were unaware of their forms being fraudulently used. And I believe they even tried to get some information from OMMA and still had some issues. So is there any movement being made on that end?
So are you talking about state agencies? Are these licensing boards considered state agencies?
Yes.
So here's the problem. There's been a strong statutory protection around the patient records. And so typically the only way that we've been able to ever provide any patient records because they're sealed is through a court order. And so through that, there's some other ways to potentially get the records. That's with a consent form, but also I believe a physician who made the recommendation can get the records for the recommendations they made.
From marijuana, they can request them?
I believe that's correct.
Because we had that issue before. The only way I was able to get these records is by having the Attorney General convene a grand jury, which
Right.
seems very aggressive.
Okay. And so, but again, and I'm sure the reason for that was to have a court order provided. And so I can't speak as far of anything beyond the statutes that we have currently, but that is essentially the problem that we have in responding to this type of situations.
But is any movement being made to try and make changes to where marijuana can cooperate with us? Or is the marijuana authority against making any changes to the patient records? I understand why they're important to keep covered, but as a physician licensing board, we're HIPAA exempt, and we can obtain even substance abuse, mental health records on folks, but we can't, obtain a medical marijuana recommendation for them.
We are not against working with y'all. We do have statutory constraints, but I think this is the perfect thing that we can discuss. One thing I left out in the director's update is we are forming several working groups, and one of those is going to be a medical working group. So we really would like to engage with the medical community to find out the concerns and do some problem solving.
Thank you.
Okay. The next changes that we have are on page 48. We already discussed both of these types of changes in the previous section with the certificate of compliance and then also the late renewal fee of $500. On page 49, there is a change removing a 30-day liquidation right after the expiration of a license. The reason that this has been removed is because there has been a statute change in 427.14N that states that no license shall possess, sell, and I believe transport without a valid unexpired license. This liquidation period would conflict with that provision because if your license is expired, then you cannot possess or sell it.
Expired but renewal pending.
That's going to be different. All right, the next change that I have is on page 53. So we have gone through statutory changes many times on the measurement of school distances. So this is another change to that per statute, which now is the nearest property line of a public school to the nearest perimeter wall of the dispensary. And this also includes language from House Bill 2646 that a school shall not include the property owned, essentially property owned by a school that is not on the same site as where there's core curriculum being had. Okay.
What is core curriculum?
So essentially where you have a building used for the classroom instruction, you have to have no longer can you state that you have an off-site football facility to be used as a school to disallow a dispensary. You have to have that football stadium on the same property as a building for classroom instruction and core curriculum.
Unless the football stadium was being used for core curriculum, I guess, right?
Yeah, so at that point...
That's kind of why I asked. Would gym class be core curriculum?
So...
I think an example I can think of, a real-world one, is like Bethany High School, for example. They play their high school football games at SNU Stadium, and they don't have classes there. They just play football there. So that wouldn't count towards that limit. I know, for example, Putnam City over by my house has a slew of land that they have bought and maybe one day will develop into something. And so they have no classes, no buildings on it right now. And so basically it wouldn't prohibit a dispensary from opening up adjacent to that property just because the school district owns it.
So I do think it is worth looking at core curriculum in Tulsa East Central. There's a dispensary right next to where they are currently building or remodeling a basketball gymnasium. Again, I don't know the distances, but it might be worth looking at, are you considering this gymnasium as part of the core curriculum, or are we looking at the main school structure that is used for 95% of the classes?
Another example is that I see in many, many communities, the administration building is off campus. The superintendent's offices would not be on campus. Well, those would not be a part of the core curriculum as well. So I think that's what they're driving at, is where the kids are.
Right.
Versus a facility that might be used 5 nights a year or used strictly for administrative purposes.
Is this part of statute?
This is directly from statute.
Okay.
I mean, I agree with the intent, but it's a little, like, I'd prefer if the language or something to the effect of, or same campus as a building used regularly for classroom instruction. I think that's the intent. Just the way it's drafted currently, who's to say what core curriculum is? And, the intent here is to, provide clarity and definitiveness to this issue, because it's been on our, it's been going on for 3 years. And I think that this core curriculum issue undermines it.
And I think core curriculum is actually defined in the education statutes. There is a definition of what core curriculum is.
Could we make a recommendation that we adopt that definition without modifying this language?
You could.
All right, I'd like to make a motion to add a definition of core curriculum based on where did it come from, Mike? Education statutes. From the education statutes. Okay. So again, a motion to define core curriculum as it is defined in the educational statutes.
I would second that motion.
Cassie, would you do a vote? Yes.
Okay, and this is to adopt definition of core curriculum from the education statutes. Adam Austin,
Yes.
Blake Cantrell,
Yes.
Brian Duzan,
Yes.
Christy Edelin,
Yes.
Mike Irvin, Wesley Holloway,
Yes.
Philip Drina,
Yes.
Michael Leek,
Yes.
Caroline Nelson.
Yes.
Motion passes.
All right. Moving on. The next change is just adding, if applicable, considering the COC changes that we've already discussed. We've also added, as part of the documentations to be provided, a list of chemicals a processor will utilize to process marijuana, and then also safety data sheets for every chemical a processor will utilize to process marijuana, if applicable. This goes, again, with the processor splitting in between non-hazardous processing licenses and hazardous processing licenses.
On the hazardous versus non-hazardous licenses, are you guys essentially looking at volatile versus non-volatile reagents, ethanol, butane, propane, and to a certain degree, depending on what the chemical
So those will all be included into also what is defined as a hazardous chemical under that OSHA standard, but those are certainly going to be some of the things defined under that.
This is intended to apply only to hazardous? Is that correct?
Sorry,
This is intended to apply to both types of processor license
Correct.
or only hazardous?
I believe it's both.
Since this is how we determine whether or not they're applying for the appropriate license type, it's important to make sure that that requirement is in there.
So when does this happen? On an initial application? When is this list provided, considering we're imposing it midstream? How's that work?
Application.
Or including renewal
Or
application.
upon renewal?
Okay.
Say, not speaking for, actually for OMA, but a normal process like in food, if something were added during the year, you would just add those to your records, and then at the next renewal, you would update said information. So I'm assuming the same thought processes. Okay.
And I guess I don't really have a question as to the actual content of what we were saying here. I guess I have a sort of theoretical question. Why would anyone get a non-hazardous?
So that's a good question.
There is no, if I get a hazardous, I can still do non-hazardous, but if I get a non-hazardous, I can't do hazardous. They're the same cost. What's my incentive to not procure a hazardous license versus, and I understand maybe the agency, the authority would like to have extra data points to share with other agencies about where those volatile locations might be, those locations using a hazardous chemicals. I guess my point is, I think 99% of people out there are just going to go ahead and get the hazardous just to be safe. When you're a lobbyist for the state, they say, well, do you want to do executive lobbying, legislative lobbying, or both? Well, everybody just checks both, because whether you're actually doing it or not, just in case, you check both. There's no difference in cost. There's no difference in compliance. So I don't know. I guess I'm asking what our goal is with this and why we want to do that.
Well,
So
real quick,
this-
Mike, isn't the non-hazardous exempt from it's not OSHA, what's the new lab requirements that are being imposed? Or am I wrong?
I'm not familiar with what you're referring to.
Let me look. You continue. I apologize.
Okay. So this was a request brought to legislators, so I don't want to overstep and speak on behalf of the constituents that brought this to them, but I believe that there are sometimes zoning restrictions on hazardous processing. So my understanding, and this is fourth-hand information, is that some processors were having difficulty getting their COCs because they didn't want processing in certain areas. But if you're really just running a bakery or making pre-rolls, there's really different zoning requirements for those license types. So while you're right, it may behoove some of our licensees to get that hazardous type even if they're not. If those licensees need that type, need a non-hazardous for other purposes, they have an option that allows them to get a more restricted authority under that license.
Thank you very much. That makes a lot more sense now to me. That's not an issue that I've encountered, so thank you very much.
So I found what I was referring to. It's in the definitions. So they distinguish hazardous and non-hazardous by reference to, it was OSHA, Hazard Communications Standard, 29 CFR, et cetera. Meaning, by implication, this is the question, is non-hazardous or exempt from compliance with those regulations?
So meaning that if you're utilizing a chemical that's classified as hazardous by those regulations, then you would fall under hazardous processor license. If you're not utilizing anything in your extraction process that would be considered hazardous under those regulations, then you would fall under the non-processor license.
Okay. I believe it's more of a reference to definitions rather than a difference in compliance requirements, if that helps clarify.
Okay, thank you.
So once these folks apply, receive a non-hazardous designation on their processor license, they're able to meet the zoning requirements or use requirements of the authority having jurisdiction. who follows up with that to make sure that they are not using some hazardous reagent, even though they may not be using a closed loop butane, propane, hydrocarbon extraction system or an ethanol system?
Mr. Irvin, if we're doing our jobs and inspecting, then it's us. We will be the ones that will figure that out.
And so the annual inspections, we would be inspecting for and looking through that lab for hazardous reagents.
Through the process, processing facility. Mm-hmm.
Okay.
And just to add here in a little bit, there's also going to be a record-keeping requirement to have these types of documents as well, which our inspectors would be looking for. Next change, we've already talked about that. So the next change is going to be on page 55. So this is going to be essentially from House Bill 2646, the bad actor addition. So if you have a disciplinary action that is brought against your license and is revoked for the following reasons, A through H, then you're not going to be subject to having a license for the next 5 years.
For clarity here, correct me if there's 3 elements: initiation of a disciplinary action,
correct,
revocation, non-renewal, or surrendering of the license, and one of A through H.
That's
correct.
That's correct.
Okay, thank you.
And the only part that we added that was not directly from statute there is going to be an H, excuse me, just adding specific examples of when it endangers the public health and safety. So adding recalls, failures, system recalls, or embargoes, or any directive by the department that may endanger the public health and safety. All right, the next changes are going to be 5-4, which we've already talked about, these two. If you go down a little bit further, there's a strikeout from, so previously we have had to provide 24-hour notice for any inspection. That provision has been taken out of statute, and so there's different changes in here that are removing those requirements, and so that comes from 427.6. The next change is, again, I think we've already talked about that, sharing confidential information with other agencies to ensure compliance. And again, the 24-hour notice being taken out. This also comes straight from statute that we may suspend or revoke a license for failure to pay any fine or monetary penalty. And that's 427.6 as well. As previously discussed, the safety data sheets and inventory for each chemical utilized by a processor are records required to be kept on the premises of a licensee. And so this will help with our inspection authority. The next change comes straight from statute, I believe it's 63 OS 427.3. Again, we haven't really touched this, but for what the statute states, that you have to have the following documentation readily available on premises.
Can you clarify on premises? Digital copies, all right? Because I have heard a specific instance of, right or wrong, I don't know, a inspector issuing a violation for a business who had digital records as required, but they didn't have hard copies. So they were violated because this inspector's interpretation of on-premises was physical copies. Can you add some context to this, please?
Do you want to answer that? Yeah, so typically, as long as they have the records readily accessible to where a...
Sometimes we hear, I've got those records, it's just I left my laptop somewhere else to access those records. That obviously is not having those records on premises. So I can't speak to that situation specifically, but if the inspector can access those records on site, whether that's on a computer or a physical copy, that should not result in a violation.
Another interesting point about that situation, and I don't know whether it was OMMA or OBN or whoever did the inspection, but this business was instructed to turn off their Wi-Fi, and then their lack of ability to pull their digital records was then used as a violation.
Well, if you could find out, it could have been a city, county, OMMA, OBN. If you find out more information and find out it was us, please let me know.
Yeah, I will. I don't recall exactly where I heard that, but I'll figure it out. But going back to the question, digital is okay. Hard copies on premises are not required necessarily.
Again, if the inspectors can be on site and get to those records, then those records are on site. But we have had people tell us, oh, I left that laptop somewhere else, so I've got it digitally, just not here. That is not accessible on site.
Accessible on site being the key. Okay. Other question is section E. Every employee of every license type, we need to have those records on hand. Is that correct?
I believe this comes straight from statute. And
Okay. Thank you.
So to meet that qualification, I-9s, 941s, all of those things are going to be able to qualify for that, meeting that definition in that inspection item.
Yeah, I think it could, as long as it checks all the boxes of name, address, telephone number of employees and agents.
I guess my only point was that those documents should be maintained by the employer regardless of this rule from
Right.
OMMA.
That's correct. Okay, so the next change that we have is removing the requirement, this is per statute 427.13, just removing the requirement that these records HIPAA or containing private patient information shall not be retained for more than 60 days. Sorry, that was a struggle, but this does come straight from statute again.
And I'll just clarify here, in the event of a recall, it may be important for a dispensary to have that information for more than 60 days, so we needed to remove that prohibition for that purpose. But they still need to be protecting that patient information.
Right. Okay, this one is not straight from statute. So, yeah, this was discussed last time, and I believe that's why it was highlighted.
We had a robust discussion around this one last time, if I remember correctly.
So, Blake, I'll let you look at that.
I've got in my notes here that there's a discrepancy with 56D2. I just got to find that. Okay, I think it was just the absence in the earlier section on the same point of notifying the department. There was just an inconsistency in the language. That would be section 3, is it? It's stricken. Is it? No, section 2 now. We're on page 63, correct? Oh, the only thing then I would add here is just upon implementation, as it is elsewhere, because all of these, theoretically, November 1 would be applied, and as we know, the state's not prepared for that. So I would make a recommendation, as it is elsewhere, that whenever we're talking about inventory tracking system, that it is upon implementation these regs come into effect, because it's effectively impossible to comply in this manner until they're available. The inventory tracking system, that is. Making a recommendation to add upon implementation to instances of inventory tracking system requirements. Do we have a second?
I think that kind of is redundant, that, they'll be implemented, because this won't be, if we approve this today, this won't be implemented for a while, because it still has to go through the governors and.
These are emergency rules, so November 1.
Okay. Yeah, I'll second that then.
I don't know where else throughout here this would be, but hopefully you see my point, is that, like, specifically even this section 2, we must ensure that everything is reconciled in the state inventory tracking system per the definition of state inventory tracking system that is inaccessible to us effectively. So we cannot comply with that, but will be required to in 10 days. So any instance where there's a requirement that seed to sale tracking, or the state's, I should say, seed to sale tracking be utilized, should have the verbiage upon implementation added to caveat it. And it's done elsewhere, it's just not uniform.
Okay. And just to let y'all know that all these rules they're currently in effect for all the seed to sale.
Yeah, I'm aware.
System.
And I know that y'all don't enforce against it.
Right, and there's not currently, until implementation, there's not going to be enforcement of it. It's just preparing for the implementation, making sure we have the necessary rules in place.
We can move on. We'll go ahead and make the recommendation. It's clerical. Adding upon implementation to the requirements of the state inventory tracking reporting. Do we have a second?
Yeah, I'll second. But I also had the question then, since the highlighted is emergency rules, November 1st, the stuff that's underlined that was from the previous deal, when are those going to be put into action, I guess?
So the ones that are underlined, that are not highlighted, they've all been effective since June.
I thought there was something at the back of this that said something about 2022.
Our last meeting, we reviewed the permanent rules that will go into effect in 2022. Yes. Yep.
They are not. And so everything that we are reviewing right now is part of the permanent rules that we had previously reviewed, but these are going into effect November 1st, whereas the permanent rules will be going into effect in 2022.
So underlines and
that more confusing.
Underlines and strike-throughs that are not highlighted are the permanent rules we reviewed at the last meeting, to clarify.
No. So the ones that are underlined, those are emergency rules that are currently in effect, but we have to, and if we don't add them into this document, they'll disappear.
I see. Yeah,
we have to add them into this document to keep them into effect.
I had similar confusion, like the way, the formatting, really.
Yeah, and I should have started off all of this to kind of just explain why we're even back here doing emergency rules for November 1st again, and just what everything means, but.
Do we need to take a vote on that motion?
Cassie, will you do a roll call vote, please?
Yes, and this is to add upon implementation of anywhere instances of inventory tracking system are utilized. Adam Austin,
Yes.
Blake Cantrell,
Yes.
Brian Duzan,
Yes.
Christy Edelin,
Yes.
Mike Irvin, Wesley Holloway,
Yes.
Philip Jarina,
Yes.
Michael Leake,
Yes.
Caroline Nelson.
Yes.
Motion carries.
And are we good to keep going? Okay. So the next changes we already talked about were made in the previous sections. This is just now applying it to the medical marijuana business section of the confidential information being shared with other agencies. And then also as well as J. So I think we've hit both of those. Keep going. So this provision, the administrative order, comes straight from statute as well. So this gives us another tool to enforce violations. And so essentially allows us to provide a order that after we've provided 30 days of notice, we can do an order. Someone can request a hearing. And then from that point, if they don't request a hearing, the order will become final. If they do request a hearing, then they have a hearing right, and we go through the full hearing process.
How is an administrative hearing requested? I searched through the document, and there's no other instance of administrative hearing mentioned.
Okay.
These are big deals to a business, so we need to make sure that it's explicitly clear how we go about this process.
And
Cameron, I would assume we would add that information to the notice of violation so that that would be in front of you along with the notice that you're.
right. So typically we will include that with an NOV or the order that we would be sending out. The next thing we have is emergency cease and desist. This also comes straight from statute. Both of these come straight from 427.6. And so this gives us the ability to, if there's an emergency, to take action quick and then have somebody have the ability to request a hearing within 10 days after we've taken action. In the case
Can you give some examples of this? I mean, $10,000 fine per day is so steep. I want to make sure that everybody's clear on the circumstances here.
Okay, and so that $10,000 fine is only going to come into play if you have your business, if there's an emergency cease and desist, you need to stop your business and you continue to do it. So it's only going to come in violation of that. This is also in line with there's already authority under the administrative compliance order. And so that's another tool. So it's just, I believe that number is just keeping in line with what the administrative compliance order allows already. Did I answer your question?
I think he wants an example of what would.
Okay, an example would be someone.
These would be really egregious violations that are putting people's health and safety at risk. A complete refusal to do testing, known bad product that was on the shelves that they were sending out anyway. These would be really substantial situations, and all this would do would allow us to force this licensee to pause their operations until the court has made a determination of the next steps.
So anything where public health and safety is involved. That's correct.
So all of that process does still have to comply with Administrative Procedures Act? Or is this a separate action from the Administrative Procedure?
So it's a specific statutory authority from 427.6, but generally it will be in compliance with the Administrative Procedures Act because it's still given the opportunity for notice and hearing.
And these are civil actions as opposed to criminal actions?
That's correct. They're administrative actions, yeah.
You guys planning to bring it more on, out of curiosity?
Yes, we are. We're going to expand the council. We have not sat down to even flesh that out, but our next scheduled meeting here is December 6th, right? So after November 1, you guys will be the Medical Marijuana Advisory Council. You know what? I need to figure out the logistics of appointing new people. I know we go through Commissioner Fry, but give us a little time and I'll reach out and let you guys know. I mean, do you want to have a list of potential members to add and you guys vote on it? Or do you want us to, or want me to just work with staff to pick some folks?
I would err on the side of transparency. So, I mean, I'd be open to voting it. You know, I don't necessarily think, I don't personally really need to have input into it, but, you know, if you guys feel that that would be the best approach, you know, transparency, I'm always for.
Yeah, I think that's going to be key, of course, moving forward, more transparency. I know that we have ideas of the types of seats we need to add, like an environmental agency voice like DEQ. We need to make sure we have somebody in the room from there, and we have some other ideas. So I don't have it ready today, but I will get some procedures to you guys and talk through it. And we'll put those out for the public to review as far as how we're going to fill those slots.
Okay, perhaps I missed, this appears to be a new, I mean, I know it looks like they're just changing the name. So would the current members of the board need to be reappointed as well?
No, I don't think so. I mean, I think you guys were appointed and you serve at the pleasure of the commissioner. So unless you're removed, I think it remains intact.
Yeah, I think the use of additionally there means that the current composition stays.
Okay. And then on page 72, this just goes ahead and further clarifies that the board's scope is to recommend rules to the State Commissioner of Health relating to all aspects regarding the cultivation and manufacturing of medical marijuana products.
Actually, it could be a little late to add this correction, but down on F on that page, we have CFR part 120 as the recommended HACCP. It's great if you're making infused juice because that's a juice HACCP. So it's like for making carrot juice and apple juice. It should probably be CFR 117. But it may be too late to fix it right now, but.
Yeah, so we're not going to be able to fix that in permanent our emergency rules.
Okay, well, just a note then.
It's something we will definitely note.
Can you say what page you're talking about so we can
I'm
make
sorry,
a note of this?
Page 72. At the
And it's
very
section
bottom.
F?
Section F.
Okay.
It should say 21 CFR part 117 probably.
Part
It's the
117 versus 120? Okay. We will have that noted and put that on our list to fix in the next round of
It's
rules.
the same basic thought process, but the citation's not correct.
Okay, thank you for that.
Thank you. So on page 74, keep going down. The next change, it's just changing the marijuana transaction limitations. This is keeping in line with the new limitations in 63 OS 420.
I do have something related to this point.
Okay.
We did receive a violation due to verification not being conducted each time the patient arrives using OMMA verified.ok.gov. We verified, and I think most dispensaries operate in this manner, we verify and log in our point of sale system the patient's license number and expiration date, and in our system will lock it out upon expiration. At that time, then we go, if it's pending renewal or if it's in our system has expired, then we will verify. Can you guys speak to that at all? Is OMA Verify intended to be utilized every single time?
Yeah, so physicians, again, do have that option to revoke a referral, and so it is possible that someone's license is not valid even though they've not reached the expiration date for their license. We also did put in that grace period if someone applies for renewal before expiration of their patient license and they're approved, then the card in their hand is still good. So it may also benefit patients for you to look that up every time. I know you said that you do that if it's past the expiration date, so you're covered there. But in the event that somebody does lose their patient referral from a physician, your system may not be accurate, but OMA may verify would.
Okay, fair. The issue there then is that, as you all know, it's like a 40 alphanumeric license type, which we have to manually plug in. It's pretty burdensome, to be honest, especially during, rush hour, etc. Is it possible with, I know you guys have in the works a new license form, can we add a scannable barcode that would populate that field with the license number when scanned? Because that would be a huge help.
Yeah, that is high on our list of wants. Our current systems do not do that. We are working to get that, but we don't have an ETA just because of all the procedures that we have to go through to acquire new systems capable of providing that. But we are working toward that, and that's something we want very much.
Yeah, it's cumbersome, and do you add the hyphens or not? It's,
I absolutely agree.
Yeah.
On the physician revocation part, how often does that actually happen?
I don't have the numbers offhand. I would not call it a frequent occurrence. Without the numbers, I would hate to put a descriptor on it.
In regards to this marijuana transaction limits, would it be possible to add some clarity around beverages specifically? The real life scenario, I sell beverages. The real life scenario I run into, at this point, probably 50 plus dispensaries, is they read the 72 ounces of, I believe it's the edible marijuana piece, and we sell 12-ounce cans, so they can't differentiate if that's 72 ounces, 6 cans, which would be 60 milligrams of THC, which we're fine. There's not too many beverage companies in this market, but I am one of them, and that specific language has, affected my business significantly. And I'm nervous of giving direction to the store of saying, no, they're talking about active dose THC versus 72 ounces of fluid, more or less. So their hands are tied. Mine are. I don't know if we could add clarification specifically around beverages.
Do you have a recommendation of what that would look like or how that would be applied?
Yes, but I don't know, what can that opens up. It'd be more just specific talking about the active dose of marijuana in the product for me. I'm putting 10 milligrams in a 12-ounce can, and we're discussing ounces of product, more or less.
There is language where we talk about liquid THC, non-liquid THC, and final form products. And final form products are basically limited by the grams. It's just like you're talking about the percentage of THC, and you can only have up to so many grams of THC content regardless of how many units that is. Am I making sense?
Correct.
And the liquid could be handled in the same fashion probably, but then you would have to differentiate distillate liquid from a drink. And so I could see the manner in which it could be handled, but I don't know that we're going to today get language that would be specific enough without enough unintended consequences to help you very much.
We don't have a definition of edible medical marijuana products. Would that be a way to clarify this, is just add a definition of edibles effectively in kind of a similar form to final products, where they give examples may include cookies, brownies, candies, gummies, and then we just add, retail beverages or something to that effect to that definition. Is that possible here?
I think so, but I don't know if that would actually address your
Would it?
concern.
That's what I was trying to think. Can you say that again, Blake?
Just adding a definition of edible medical marijuana product to include beverages, would that do it for? Because then that would make it the 2,037.6 grams be the limit.
That is the final form.
Yeah.
Products, correct? The edibles. So we have a definition. I
That would
believe.
suffice for me, but just so everyone's clear of what that would do with my particular SKU, I'm looking at, depending on interpretation, either 6 cans, or if I went with 2,000 grams of medical marijuana, I mean, that in a milligram, 200,000 units, or versus 6. I'm doing my math right. So, I mean, it's a huge difference based on interpretation.
And Mike, I agree with you. It is kind of captured in final product, but final product isn't used in this section. So, in the alternative, we could add final product verbiage to section A here. In the alternative to defining edibles, I should say.
Or somehow include drinks, beverages in the final product definition. But final products are so broad, I believe they probably include these drinks anyway.
Yeah, beverages is included, but.
So I think it's already there, actually. It may just need some clarification.
Sure.
Do you have a recommendation? We can continue talking about this to help to make sure that we are addressing this issue. I just don't know that we're going to get there today.
We won't.
Okay.
Let me ponder on that.
Okay.
Let me fire some thoughts.
Thank you.
your way.
Do you need a break?
I think we have a motion to take
No,
a
we can't
break.
take
or?
an official break because we don't have it on the agenda, and this is an open meeting.
Okay.
But anybody that needs to take a break can obviously do that, but we'll just keep the meeting going while Cameron takes a break.
Okay.
So we'll move to the next section. Handling of medical marijuana by dispensary. Kelly, do you want to jump in? Thank you.
So this section comes from 2646. This is about the display jars of medical marijuana at a dispensary. The idea, as it was explained to me by the legislator, was that they don't want people smelling out of the big jar. You don't want people sticking their face in the big jar that you also sell out of. So they wanted to ensure that there was a clear delineation between jars that people can handle and smell and the jars that people actually get the medical marijuana that they purchase from. So this would limit those sample jars to 3 grams a piece and have a metal or plastic mesh screen just to ensure that there's no diversion, people aren't picking samples out of it or touching it, and that... Sorry, I want to make sure I don't miss any of the important pieces here. That you cannot sell from that smell jar. So these jars would have to be labeled just with the licensee name, where that medical marijuana came from, the name of the strain, the batch number, and just a statement that that sample not for retail sale.
This one's clunky. That was how I interpreted the intent as well, which is to say 3 grams per container, not in the aggregate. However, the way it reads, it could go either way, aggregate or each. Given that this is statutory, are we able to make clarifying language without changing the fundamentals of it? Because this needs a little cleaning up.
Cameron, is it acceptable to clarify that the sample jar sizes are limited to 3 grams each?
Absolutely. So the 3 grams come from us. That 3 grams is not from statute itself. And so I think that that would be an appropriate recommendation.
What's the thought behind 3 grams?
So I think it's just limiting the size of what the sample is provided into.
The reason I ask is because we utilize smell pods, which is what we call these sample jars. They're maybe that big, and we put a quarter, 7 grams in it, because to do less looks like it's empty, and it doesn't give you a great representation of the different sizes and variety of that particular strain, etc. And are we married to this 3 grams or?
So you all are certainly welcome to make a recommendation about the size limitations for the sample jars and clarifying that that weight is each jar. We don't want the sample jars so large that diversion is more enticing. We don't want people walking off with those jars. But this is pretty common across other states that have this kind of language.
Right, and I believe other states have 3 grams exactly as well.
Yeah, fair enough. Just making that clarification. Protected by a plastic or metal mesh screen. I read that as a requirement. Is that correct?
Correct.
Okay, it's a little unclear. Trying to get my hands around exactly the intent here before I make a recommendation. So is the intent also then that sample, if it's protected in a sample jar and not for retail sale at that time, is the intent that we cannot in the future, when we are down to only that sample jar remaining of that flower strain, cannot put that on clearance with an indication that it was a former sample? Is that the intent?
Correct. The last line reads before the last line in A, the medical marijuana dispensary shall dispose of the sample in accordance with that rules.
Again, that's how I read it. I just wanted to make that clarification. Given that it is in a protected encasement, why can it not be resold?
People are breathing on it.
That's per statute.
That's statutory, that part? Okay. Yeah, that's how I read it, and that's fine. I'm just wanting to make sure I'm understanding, because this will have a impact on our operations. How should these be labeled? Batch number, is that needing to be printed on it? Can a QR code have this required information in it? How would you all like to see that presented?
I mean, the preference would certainly be for people to be able to read it without any devices. I don't know if that is specifically how that reads or not, but
I'm sorry, Cameron, what did you say?
She was just asking if the language in B was from statute or our language. B is our language, so to implement the statutory language.
So, I don't know. I don't know what the intent on batch number versus QR code. I haven't been around long enough to know kind of the difference. So if you have a recommendation based on your experience, we would like to hear it.
It suggests too that the following statement, quote, the sample not for retail sale, if that probably wouldn't work on a QR. A QR is the thing you scan with your phone camera, right? And it pops up. So I would imagine you would still need, if you did the QR, which I think is a great idea, you would still probably need to have the clear language on the container that said the sample wasn't for retail sale, that didn't need the QR. Does that make sense?
It does. Most of this we already do, but I'm just trying to think as we continue adding to these sorts of requirements, we're talking about a business card size placard. Another clarification, other containers, it seems to be kind of dancing with package. Could we, and I'll make a recommendation to this effect, I just want to make sure that this is in keeping with the intent, other sample containers, just to make that distinction. Is that?
I think you can make that recommendation, absolutely.
All right, so I got a couple. The first is beginning with the first part of the sentence is I recommend that we change the language to be, starting on line 2, no more than 3 grams in or of flour in each of these separate display cases. So the language again on line 2, starting with no more than 3 grams of flour in each of these separate display cases is the recommendation, to clarify that this is not 3 grams in the aggregate and that it's per display.
I got a question. What about the candy? You know, someone has a jar that they're, they come and, I don't know if they could do that anymore, but they're selling individual like Nerds ropes, and they wanted to have a display for that. Would flour be too?
Well, I think correct me again, I think the intent here is to make sure that there's no handling of product that could end up being sold to the public later, and edibles, there's no need to handle. Usually the display of an edible is just packaging.
So
the statute only applies to medical marijuana. It does not go into medical marijuana products. Yeah.
All right, to recap, the recommendation is that beginning on line 2, no more than 3 grams in each of the separate display cases. Do we have a second?
I'll second.
And in this action item, were we also going to include other sample containers?
Yeah, I was going to make those as separate recommendations, but that would be simpler.
Do the same recommendation for both of these. Clarify sample jar sizes are limited to no more than 3 grams in each separate display case, and include other sample containers. Would you like?
I mean, I would say let's just go ahead and vote and just make sure everybody's on the same page for each one, and then.
Keep them separate?
Yeah, I think so.
Okay. Okay, this is for clarify sample jar sizes are limited to no more than 3 grams in each separate display case. Adam Austin.
Yes.
Blake Cantrell.
Yes.
Brian Duzan.
Yes.
Christy Edelin.
Yes.
Mike Irvin. Yes. Wesley Holloway.
Yes.
Philip Jarena.
Yes.
Michael Leake.
Yes.
Caroline Nelson.
Yes.
Okay.
Okay, one more question before that other recommendation. Licensee name. Entity, DBA, because the majority of businesses operate under a DBA. Licensee name, what is needing to be added to this?
it would have to be their business name.
It's a name that's on the license.
We could certainly add a requirement to include also their DBA if you would prefer that. But the way that reads is the licensed business name.
Okay. You're saying, though, that we could add a trade name in the alternative?
You can make that recommendation.
Okay. Then I'd like to make a recommendation that in section B1, that it reads licensee name and/or licensee trade name that grew the medical marijuana. We have a second?
Second.
Brian, was that second?
Yes.
we go ahead and vote on the include other sample containers first? And did you first that motion?
Yes.
Okay. Did we get a second on that one? Was
Yeah.
that you as well? Okay. Okay, Adam Austin?
Could you clarify what we're voting on
Yes,
this
this
time?
is the previous.
Do you mind clarifying what we're
item.
voting on right now?
Absolutely. This was the previous action item that Blake had to include other sample containers on line 3, actually.
Section B.
E.
It's in both. It's in section A or other
Where
containers.
it says other containers?
Yeah, just changing other container, that term being used in A and B to be other sample container, to make that clarification so it distinguishes it from packaging.
Yes.
Okay, thank you, Adam. Blake Cantrell,
Yes.
Brian Duzan.
Yes.
Christy Edelin,
Yes.
Mike Irvin. Yes. Wesley Holloway,
Yes.
Philip Jarina,
Yes.
Michael Leake,
Yes.
Caroline Nelson.
Yes.
Okay, motion passes. Okay, and now I have section B1 to read licensee name / trade name that grew the medical marijuana. Is that correct?
And or trade name, yes.
And or trade name. Okay. Adam Austin,
No.
Blake Cantrell,
Yes.
Brian Duzan,
Yes.
Christy Edelin,
Yes.
Mike Irvin. Yes. Wesley Holloway,
Yes.
Philip Jarina,
Yes.
Michael Leake,
Yes.
Caroline Nelson.
Yes.
Okay, motion carries.
I had a question. If Blake, or Mr. Chairman, did you cover all your issues? Okay, so we have a mesh screen of either metal or plastic. And this mesh screen is going to allow patients or caregivers to smell and handle the strains. So they could remove the screen, reach in and handle the product. How are they going to handle the product? How is that piece going to work?
Well, in practice, at least in my case, they don't. They're handling the container, which was kind of going back to my earlier point. They're moving the tab and smelling. They don't have access to the physical product, at least in our case.
And I would tend to agree. I think that was more the intent, so they could have a container that they could handle and be able to smell, as opposed to taking out the product and having them.
And I know this is statute, so I guess my point here is that may be something we need to address come February, because that's not what that says. And I don't think we have the authority to deal with that.
Okay, thank you.
All right, we ready to move on? So the next changes we have are prohibited acts, and this is just now that growers and dispensaries are allowed to do non-infused pre-rolls that do not exceed 1 gram. This is just adding prohibited acts that you can't do infused pre-rolls if you're a grower dispensary, and you can't do pre-rolls that exceed 1 gram. And those are from statute.
I think this is another case of unintended consequences. I mean, this clearly conflicts with both the definition of grower and dispensary being permitted to do pre-rolls less than 1 gram that are non-infused. They explicitly provide for that in the definition of the license. Sell or otherwise transfer, a prohibition on that would completely undermine and is in conflict with the definitions. In addition to 81S on page 89, it's also conflicting with that. I see what y'all are getting at here, but I would, just like to point out that, yes, correct, dispensaries and growers shall not package infused pre-rolls, but to prohibit their sale or transfer means that they couldn't purchase or sell those infused pre-rolls from a processor as permitted and as intended, and they could not resell them to the public. To prohibit the sale or transfer, it breaks the supply chain, and basically processors doing infused pre-rolls or larger size pre-rolls wouldn't be able to transfer to any of the other license types. I'm sure that's not the intent.
Yeah, so can you go ahead and make a recommendation there?
My recommendation would be to strike in sections N and O the words sell or otherwise transfer.
Okay.
Second.
I was looking through that, and the O, if you're allowing dispensaries to make pre-rolls, there's still a testing requirement to that, I believe, that they would have to satisfy.
Yeah, it's throughout the rest of the rules that only processors are permitted to create pre-rolls in excess of 1 gram or which are infused. That's very clear explicitly all throughout the rules. This, however, I think has the unintended effect of to sell or otherwise transfer, prohibiting a dispensary or a grower from that we would then not be able to purchase those pre-rolls from that processor who did create them legally, because to transfer would be to acquire or to sell to an inpatient.
I'll second your motion. I had one question. Is this statute?
So the statute applies, it's closely related, but what he's specifically talking about is not.
So refresh my memory. Can processors transfer to grows currently or in November after these statutes go into effect?
Processors cannot transfer to grows. The only time that they could ever transfer to grows is in November 1st. There's now a statute that allows for remediation from the grower to a processor, and processor can only transfer back to that specific grower.
So there would be no instance where a grower might have an infused product, pre-roll. There is no instance in which a grower should ever possess an infused pre-roll.
That's correct.
Okay. So then we have a dispensary that is able to accept infused pre-rolls from processors. I don't understand them not being able to package those, but they would transfer those if they were to purchase or have those transferred in. And maybe I'm not understanding transfer, but they would transfer that to the patient upon retail sale. So that would prevent them, am I understanding this correct, that it would prevent the actual sale of an infused pre-roll by a dispensary?
You're correct. Hence my recommendation that in N&O we strike sell or otherwise transfer. The packaging of those things is pretty clear all throughout. To prohibit the sale or transfer undermines and is in conflict with a number of provisions. So just making that clarification to your example.
But I think that only applies to dispensaries. There is no circumstance in which a grow might even possess an infused pre-roll.
Could we almost separate stuff out and say medical marijuana grows shall not package, sell, or otherwise transfer infused pre-rolls, and then O, medical marijuana grows shall not package, sell, or otherwise transfer pre-rolls that exceed 1 gram. And then if you wanted to limit the dispensaries from packaging the infused pre-rolls or packaging pre-rolls over 1 gram, you could then make a, was it NOP and Q? MNO.
It makes sense to just strike out and dispensaries from these particular two.
Right.
Yeah, and Mike, your point's accurate that growers, by definition, would not be included in Section N. So
the real world implications of this would be if I were to go into a dispensary, I could literally see a big pile of 1 gram pre-rolls there with no packaging. Is that kind of what? Okay.
No. This is due to ambiguity on this point.
I had a different vision
there was
in
a
my head, and I'm like, wow, that would be really weird to walk in and just see a big pile. And it's like, okay, where did these come from? What's going on with this?
Where they came from is in the past, the statutes were either muddy or silent on the license types that could manufacture pre-rolls. So dispensaries were doing it, growers were doing it. This is codifying that only processors can do it when it exceeds 1 gram or is infused. That's what's they're trying to get at here and why.
But are we making an assumption that growers don't make pre-rolls? Do we know that for a fact?
Mm-hmm.
So
I don't want to speak for every grower, but
that's what I'm saying. I don't know that we can say that definitively.
Mike, do you know where in the regs that's spoken to specific to the grow?
My comments were directed at N for infused pre-rolls. There is no circumstance in which a grow would have an infused pre-roll in its possession for any reason.
right. So yeah, it's specific to the infused pre-roll part.
Because if you're making it infused, you're processing it, right?
That's correct.
Okay, so Mike, to make sure I'm clear, you're recommending that in addition to that, we also strike dispensaries from Section N? Or I'm a little unclear there.
I would leave it to the folks who know that best, but I don't believe I could support striking in its entirety.
No,
I
I was
growers
saying
should not possess those in any capacity.
Right, I was saying to reflect what your concern is, if we struck just and dispensaries from just N, would that capture what you're trying to do?
The only thing in that specific section, and I'm not fully aware, are dispensaries allowed to package infused pre-rolls in other areas of the language, or are they prohibited from that act in other areas of the rules?
Let me
Prohibited.
They are prohibited in other
Yes.
areas of the rules.
They are, yes. Let me recap. So N would read, per your recommendation and mine, N would read, medical marijuana growers shall not package infused pre-rolls. O would read, medical marijuana growers and dispensaries shall not package pre-rolls that exceed 1 gram.
I would think in N we could remove dispensaries if the packaging is addressed in other portions of the rules, and just make it clear that growers are not to even touch infused pre-rolls. There's no ability for them to even touch them. So if we could just remove and dispensaries, that would take care of the grow, and then address dispensaries in a separate manner.
I do just want to bring up one real life scenario and try not to rabbit hole, but I mean, as a processor, I contract manufacture for grows. If I contract manufacture an infused pre-roll for their brand that they want to go push out, they did not process that product. I did on just a fee, more or less. How would that look if we just no more contract me? Okay.
We do the same thing, but we require the grower to also have a processing license or a dispensary that we can legally transfer that product to.
Have to go just move it.
So they just have to apply for and receive an additional license.
There's a lot of that moving.
Adam just raised a good point. I mean, N and O are in conflict with other provisions that do address this more clearly. Should we just strike N and O? There is already a prohibition on growers or dispensaries packaging infused pre-rolls and pre-rolls in excess of 1 gram. Do we need this redundancy?
And just to give you a little background, the reason we put it here is to try to get those prohibitions just in the definition section and to actually put into more of in our rules. And that's why that's done. I'll leave the rest up to you, but I just wanted to let you know that's why we were doing that.
I mean, rather than going back and forth, would that be easier or appropriate?
Was this statutory? Because if it's statutory, we cannot strike it.
So it's related to statute, but as worded, I do agree. I'm going to let y'all make y'all's recommendation there. But just to provide the specific statutory language for dispensaries is the total weight of each pre-roll package and sold by a medical marijuana dispensary shall not exceed 1 gram.
Sorry, as just would, and this is not my recommendation, this is something for discussion. Would it make sense then to say strike everything that is not specific to the statute? That way we maintain whatever the statute was expecting us to, and we don't necessarily have to get into the weeds of everything else.
So if I can just add, I think that putting this specifically in the Prohibited Acts, even though it's covered elsewhere, just helps to clarify for our licensees. As a grower, I cannot do this. As a processor, or a dispensary, I cannot do this. While I believe you're right about the prohibition on the transfer or sell of these items for dispensaries specifically, I think putting it here helps clarify for licensees, just make it really clear for them that they can't do this. So I think that, you had made a recommendation, and then Michael had also made a recommendation that either we break dispensaries out into P and Q and address them separately, or we could remove the prohibition on sell and otherwise transfer in N and O and leave it for both growers and dispensaries. It would be clearer if we broke it out into the growers in N and O, dispensaries in P and Q, but that's up to you all to make that recommendation. But I agree with your concerns there, and I do think just making it really clear to licensees that this is prohibited, because there has been confusion whether or not they're allowed to do pre-rolls in the past. This will help take the ambiguity out of it for them.
Yeah, and I agree. That is an ambiguity in practice, and it does need clarifying. This just, I don't think, reflects the intent, as you all, agree. So how about this? Sticking with the original recommendation I made, where we are striking the words sell or otherwise transfer from sections N and O. Additionally, for OMMA to, in the alternative or in addition to this, to break out the grower and dispensary responsibilities with respect to these sections. Would that be appropriate?
You can make that recommendation.
And I do.
Okay, I agree with that.
I second.
Since the package seems to be the word everybody's getting, that seems hanging up, could we change it to created? They should not create any pre-rolls. It kind of means the same thing, but I just figured I'd throw that out there since we're already kind of out there.
And I think that's
and that does come from
consistent with
too.
the other language, yeah. And you could always just recommend that OMA adjust this language to clarify that dispensaries are not prohibited from selling or transferring pre-rolls that are infused or exceed 1 gram.
So to recap again, the recommendation, N and O, strike, sell or otherwise transfer. And further recommendation that OMA may clarify the language relative to this clause, these clauses. And we had a second from Adam, I believe. Whenever you're ready, Cassie.
Okay, let's see. We are I have a lot of striking section in and O, and the words sell and otherwise transfer, and also clarify language relative to this clause. Okay, and first was Blake, second Adam. I'm going to count you both as yay. Brian Duzan.
Yes.
Christy Edelin.
Yes.
Mike Irvin.
Yes.
Wesley Holloway.
Yes.
Philip Jarina.
Yes.
Michael Leake.
Yes.
Caroline Nelson.
Yes.
Okay, motion passes.
Okay, so to keep moving forward, page 81, we're going to get into testing, subchapter 8. Yeah. So the first correction we have here is just changing terpenoid potency to terpenoid type and concentration. That is a change in 63 OS 427.07. The next change we have is the batch sizes, which comes from statute. So now harvest batches are not to exceed 15 pounds, with the exception of plant material to be sold to a processor for purposes of turning it into a concentrate, and then it can be 50 pounds. Further, so that's straight from statute. Further, processors are required to separate production batches not to exceed 4 liters of liquid medical marijuana concentrate, or 9 pounds for non-liquid medical marijuana products, and for final medical marijuana products no greater than 1,000 grams of THC. So most of that comes from statute. We did do a little bit of language because the statute says concentrate. Concentrate can be liquid and non-liquid, so it separates those two things. So we're just trying to clarify that the 4 liters applies to liquid medical marijuana concentrate, and then the 9 pounds applies to non-liquid medical marijuana products. As defined in the definitions, this is mostly the other types of concentrate that are not liquid. And so just to try to make that as clear as possible, that's why we did that. But I will leave that up to y'all's thoughts and discussion.
And this is the section, I think Member Holloway had some question about earlier on some drink. I believe it was a drink that he was describing. And I think that would fall into the final medical marijuana products.
That's correct.
And so the testing limitations would be based not on the fluid ounces contained within the container, but with it, the number of grams of THC actually.
That's correct.
Okay.
I do want to clarify. I think his comments were about the transaction limits for
Right.
patients, not about the testing limits. So there
Right.
still may be some need to clarify that further in the future.
Absolutely, but I guess my point was that this, I think it is addressed. It may just need to be clarified that is not just about gummies and brownies. It's also a liquid product as well. So, all right, just to make sure that I'm clear on this, and liquid medical marijuana concentrate is what we would commonly call distillate. And then the non-liquid medical marijuana product would be what we would commonly call a wax or a hash or some of those kinds of terms. And then the final medical marijuana products would be the gummies, cookies, infused products, liquids, that sort of thing.
In the packet
That's correct.
that you all have, there is a draft revision of our testing guide that helps kind of illustrate these batch size requirements. I understand that this does not include pre-rolls, and there's been a request that there be a separate page addressing testing requirements for non-infused pre-rolls made at growers and dispensaries. But if this helps at all, we've pulled in the definitions of harvest batch, production batch, final products, and kind of shown the flow of the product. If you all have any feedback there, but this was to help pull in all these different sections of the rules about testing requirements and put them in one place to hopefully make it all easier to understand.
And that is on the website.
We have an older version on the website, so this is the draft that reflects this new rule language.
As these rules came about, I'm fielding more calls and text about this than any other, and that's why I'm trying to publicly clarify that this is what that means, because there is a lot of confusion out there from business owners who don't know what that exactly means.
Definitely taking that into account, and that's one thing that we've tried to clarify as much as possible. I also just want to make note or mention of the fact from the definitions that we talked about earlier, final product is also a new definition that for some reason was not highlighted. So just we're talking about that now, so I just wanted to bring that to y'all's attention if y'all look back there, but also the other definitions of non-liquid. But I hear your sentiments.
So, and I apologize if I missed this when I ran to the restroom, but so 1 liter of concentrate or distillate, if it's 100% potency, it creates 1 million milligrams of THC product. That matches here the 1,000 grams, which is 1 million milligrams of final product. With me so far? So to me, this looks like the final product. I guess I'm just a little unclear on this. As you mentioned, I think a lot of people are. Like 1,000 grams of THC is 1 million milligrams, which is, the more familiar term. 4 liters of liquid is 4 million at best. Usually some 80% to 100% is the range, usually. So we're saying that whenever it is pre-processed, raw distillate, prior to being turned into an edible, you can test 4 liters. But final product, 1 million milligrams per batch, maximum. Is that correct?
I believe I'm following that, and that is per statute.
Yeah, I just wanted to make that clarification because I think one of the things throwing people is the use of grams instead of milligrams. 1,000 grams is 1 million milligrams. A lot of edibles.
I think we could certainly put a translation, so to speak, to say, 1,000 grams or 1,000 milligrams, or also put the milligrams in there because we did the same with grams and ounces earlier. We can do that. If that would clarify, and we can absolutely put it on our testing guides, even if that's not part of the rules.
Yeah, I think that I just wanted to make that distinction that it's not intended to be every 1,000 milligrams, which would be a lot of tests for a lot of edibles. It's 1 million milligrams. Okay. Do we need to make a recommendation to that effect?
This come directly from statute, this 1,000 grams language?
That's correct.
Okay. So I think just knowing that and knowing that it's not the standard practice for the industry to use grams, that's a communication we can also have with the legislature moving forward.
Well, I guess per Dr. Williams' suggestion, then my recommendation would be that in the final line where it says 1,000 grams, we add a clarification or 1 million milligrams of THC.
I'll second that.
Okay, and this is to add in batch size. Add clarification that includes milligrams or 1 million milligrams of THC. Adam Austin.
Yes.
Blake Cantrell.
Yes.
Brian Duzan.
Yes.
Christy Edelin.
Yes.
Mike Irvin. Okay. Wesley Holloway.
Yes.
Philip Drina.
Yes.
Michael Leake.
Yes.
Caroline Nelson.
Yes.
Okay, motion passes.
I guess my hesitation is that, I mean, we all know the system, and it's based on multiples of 10, and it's an easy calculation, and just adding things to it which don't necessarily need to be there. And I think that when we talk about distillate or liquid medical marijuana, that's where the confusion really comes in, is when you have liquid versus weight, volume versus weight. Those things kind of tend to confuse, because now you have to have conversion factors, and specific gravity comes into effect. I mean, there are a lot of things when you have to transfer. So I'm glad we did distillate in a volume basis where we do the other things based on weight. And that is appropriate. It would really get confusing if you tried to do it another way.
Okay, so we're ready to move on? Okay, so the next changes that we have, as previously discussed, we've now added that remediated and decontaminated medical marijuana may be returned only to the originating licensed commercial grower. So when the commercial grower sends it to be decontaminated to remediated, the only time a processor should ever transfer anything to a grower by statute now is to return that decontaminated or remediated product or flour.
But decontaminated or remediated. So that means it is not only a processor returning the flour in flour form or the biomass in biomass form. This says that processor can remediate that by turning it into distillate, for instance, and returning the distillate to the grower, because it is decontamination or remediation. So that would be handing processed products back to a grower. And I'm in agreement with that. I just want to clarify that that is the intent. And
So correct me if I'm wrong, Cameron, but medical marijuana is only flour. So it does not include medical marijuana products being returned to the originating licensee, so it would necessarily exclude any kind of distillate that was created by the remediation process.
That's correct.
So is this remediation only in regards to flour products, I'm assuming?
So as written right now, and I just pulled up the statute to make sure that this was consistent with the statute, but it does only say remediated and decontaminated medical marijuana, which would only be flour, would not be products.
decontaminated is decontaminating the flour but keeping it in flour form. Correct? Remediation, however, is taking that and turning it into something else other than flour.
I just lost mine.
But things, when you get into the kind of catch-22 where the grower shouldn't be in possession of a concentrate because they don't have a processor license. Yeah, but that would kind of start to go afoul of that.
So, our lab director, Lee Rhodes, is on his way, so he can help us through this conversation.
I can add just a little bit. Both the definitions in the rules for decontamination and remediation do not specifically state that it's turned into a liquid product. So while applicably that may typically be the case, we don't want to close the door on new methods of decontamination or remediation that would maintain that flower form and then allow it to go back. But Lee could certainly explain it all a lot better than I can.
I think, yeah.
I'd like to point out in the definitionals, decontamination and remediation both note harvest batch or production batch. By implication, that would have to be both. Because a harvest batch is flower, production batch is everything else.
And that just simply means that you can remediate a harvest batch and you can remediate a production batch. So not necessarily to apply to that scenario.
Is this intended to preclude sending it to waste? I don't know. Would there be a circumstance for that?
So it's going to go through another process. If you can't remediate it, then it's going to go back through, I believe, the retesting process. And if you can't get it to pass at that point, then it would go potentially to this.
Well, the way this is written, it would have to go back to the grower.
This, to me, is the only exception to where a grower could have a processed product. And to me, that clearly says that it is a processed product and it can be returned to the grower. If it did not say remediation, if it only said decontamination, then I would say it has to be returned in flower form or in biomass form.
And just from is there a way to remediate without it being processed into a solvent?
That, I think, is a decontamination process where they can use things like ozone. There are certain light. There are various things they can do with heat and other things to decontaminate those products. And there are those companies out there that do that. And that is certainly a decontamination procedure. And the flower or biomass is kept in that same form. But a remediation is you're taking that contaminated biomass, processing it into something that is no longer contaminated. And whether that be a distillate or some other product, I think that is very clear that that's what that means.
Okay. Yeah. So I hear you. And I will say the only problem that we have, though, through the statute language is when they use medical marijuana, they use medical marijuana product pretty consistently when it includes both of those. And here in the statute, it specifically just applies to medical marijuana being returned. And so there's a potential there that constricts us because throughout the statutes, they use them when they mean both pretty consistently. And here they've only used medical marijuana. And so that might be what constricts us by the statute.
And so we can look at the definition of remediation and what that is, because that's where I'm coming. I understand that is just the medical marijuana. And it's the definition of decontamination versus the definition of remediation that I'm addressing.
I hear you.
It's on page 87 of these rules if we want to scroll down and look. Not that it is not the definition per se, but it describes remediation.
I think that is absolutely clear that processed product can be returned to the grower.
What's clear to me is that these sections conflict a little bit, and we need to deconflict them.
I personally have no objection to that. Is there a reason? What public policy effort or objective would we be trying to achieve by preventing that? I guess is the overarching question.
Yeah, so the only thing that I can think of right now is we've always had a downstream movement. Growers have never been in possession of any type of concentrate, distillate. They've always been able to grow and move that down the process or to processors or dispensaries. And so now you're providing them actual distillate, which is just different than what's always been allowed. And so that's the only thing that's popping up to my mind there.
In this section on remediation, decontamination, that is from the statute as well. I seem to recall that, but I wouldn't. I don't have 100% memory on it, but I believe that is directly from statute as well. And that's part of some of the original language that's been in statute for a while. So I certainly have no objection to it. I just wanted to clarify that we all understood these sections the same way.
No, that's a great point and a great conversation to have.
Actually, the issue I could see is you're going to cause a little bit of confusion of your field staff and possibly generate conflict that shouldn't be, because you'll be at a grow and be like, oh, okay, what is this doing here? And it may come across different, and the whole thing's spin sideways as to where now you go there, you know it's not supposed to be there. So if it's returned, it may be that they just need to maintain some sort of paperwork to clarify that, because that'll be a red flag for an inspector.
Yeah, and certainly all the transfer rules apply. The product coming in has to have shown a failed test. That's going to have a manifest along with the transfer provided to the processor, who then has to show that process going through and then the transfer back. Prior to the transfer back, there has to be a clean test from a licensed testing laboratory, and then that product can be transferred back. So yes, there will be a 100% documented paper trail from seed to sale, how that product was dealt with throughout the process. And it's a matter of training on OMMA. We just have to train people that these are the only circumstances in which this can happen. And then if it's anything else, then we have to deal with that in another fashion.
We have the possibility of one or two leaving, and two leaving would break quorum. Do we have a recommendation on this, Mike, or can we move forward trying to avoid the...
I think it's fine the way it is. I just wanted to clarify that,
Sure.
that's what that meant.
Okay.
We would have to vote on all the other stuff prior to them leaving, breaking the quorum, so.
Just putting it on the radar. Michael and Mike may need to step out, so just be mindful of that, please.
What time do they have to leave?
I said noon, but I can do 12. So we just keep moving one.
I have an immediate family member having surgery today, and so basically when I get the call, that's when I have to go.
So without a recommendation, then what does that take us to? Okay.
Move on.
In layman's terms, can you kind of just clarify the difference between an embargo and a recall for us?
With recall, we've had pretty broad rulemaking authority, and so we've kind of outlined a process of what that recall would look like and things that licensees who are having product recalled, what they need to provide the department.
So how because I mean, there's a lot of obligation. Just first and foremost, I agree with what is happening here because recalls are, again, have the potential of completely killing a business, have a lot of harm just in the implication. So we just need to be very careful about the approach and the structure of it. So I'm glad that this has been addressed here. But for example, on the embargo, how any commercial licensee with knowledge, how are we becoming aware? Is notice being provided? Like, how do we know that we now have all these duties?
Let me go back and look at the language.
If a licensee is aware that another licensee has product that may be dangerous, then they need to participate in this process. If, like a testing laboratory who has tested the product and knows that it is not safe, they have to help participate in this process.
So I guess the standard there is, you need to notify us.
So essentially, when product is embargoed, OMMA will make a determination of whether it can be remediated or whether it is in fact not poisonous or unsafe to the public, at which point the embargo would be removed. If they make the determination that it cannot be, or per Section E, if any embargoed product is transferred in any capacity, it now becomes a recall. Okay.
So an embargo is kind of a pause while we figure out whether or not it's safe. And if you violate that and transfer it during the embargo, then it's a recall because we have reason to suspect it may not be safe. Then if we know it's not safe and it's already been transferred, then we do a recall to pull that product back.
So it goes back to my question of how do we the licensees become aware of an embargo? Because per E, I read this as transfer in any form, including B2B, of an embargoed product triggers recall?
So
typically how a licensee will know is there will be an investigation that begins, or we've received a complaint of some sort. And so there will be contact with the licensee typically. Hey, we have this stuff that's, if our QA lab has tested something that tests above thresholds for something that's dangerous for human consumption. So there's also that aspect of it that most of the times this happens is because it's an investigation that's going on. And that knowledge will be provided to the licensee there as well. But if there's other things that happen to where there's potential dangerous product that they have knowledge about, there's still going to be that.
So like what I'm digging at here that is supposing there's product that's been embargoed, which is later determined to be actually safe, but while it was in embargo status, it was business to business transferred, never reached the public, but that alone triggers recall with much steeper harm, theoretically. What happens then? You see what I'm getting at? Like the transfer triggering in every case. Well, what happens if later we determine that it's safe?
So I'm just going to kind of take a big picture here. If something's embargoed, it's because we really think that it needs to be embargoed. We're not going to just come, Sure. So I think that this is an extreme circumstance of something that immediately affects the public health. And Lee, you can jump in if you have anything to add. I do hear what you're saying, but if we embargo something, that our intent is to say, hold it tight until we discover that it is safe for any kind of movement. So embargo means, leave it exactly where it is.
Effectively, there would be notice to the public or to all licensees or something to that effect. I just want to make sure that, and I understand that that's the intent, of course. I'm just, thinking, playing devil's advocate, a transfer triggering recall, I just wanted to clarify, really.
Yeah, you would have received notice. You would know that there's an embargo.
Okay.
You would know that the expectation is for you to not transfer that.
Okay.
I'll
As long
also-
as there's clear notice is my main concern.
When we have our seed to sale system up and running, we'll be able to put an immediate hold on that product for everyone who's in possession of it. So those who are properly utilizing the seed to sale system would not be able to create a transfer of that product in the first place if it's under embargo. So once
Using a real world example, Monday's email relative to the platinum OG sugar, would that be an embargo recall? What's that?
It's a different situation, and would love to talk to you about that. Do you mind if we try to get through some of these before we lose quorum, and then we can talk about that as well? Because yes,
Sure.
it's very important.
Yeah, I'm just trying to understand the difference.
I get it. Well, that is an unfortunately very different situation because of its makeup.
I think we're looking at no context here. Can you just describe maybe briefly, this is subsection G. So obviously there's A through G and then there's a main topic. So what is the main heading of this section? Testing
It's the testing standards.
Okay, and then as we go down, we see A, B, all the way through G. Now, as I read this language, it says that if a licensee gets a failed test for anything, that they have to notify the department, put a red tag on all of those products, and it is embargoed until they can get it fixed. So a failure on a residual solvent test which the cure is put it back in the oven like grandma, the cake's not done, we just put it back in the oven and cook it a little longer. So we have to have an embargo on that product, put a red tag on it, put it back in the oven, then we send it back, it gets tested again. Now we're no longer under embargo, but in the meantime, we've had to notify the department that there's been a failed test. Am I correct so far? Okay. So then we talk about if these products have gotten out, now we do a recall. How in the world do these products ever get out with a failed test? We've got other major issues there as opposed to a failed test. That now we're talking about.
And without seed to sale tracking, we're running into issues. So, yeah.
But I do want to clarify, I ate a failed test for a residual solvent. I have to notify the department. We already have rules that the testing lab has to notify the department. So now we have 2 notifications coming to the department. Is that correct?
That's correct. And the requirement is actually in current rules. The requirement is in current rules as well that the grower or processor is supposed to notify the department as well. It's not, I'd have to hunt through it because I've had to hunt for it to tell people, inform them of that before as well, but it is in there currently.
Let's try to
And
get
it
through.
is on the checklist whenever our compliance folks come out to ascertain whether notification has taken place.
Thank you, Lee. Let's try to get through as much of maybe the areas that you guys have noted that you had comments or questions on the rest of the language while we have a quorum in the room.
I do have something on D. So you were right, page 84. Yeah, section D. So in section C, there's a litany of obligations that every commercial licensee in possession of or who has ever had possession of a recalled good, undertaking measures, distribution list, identifying all the products, et cetera, not to mention the financial cost of product on your shelves that is subject to a recall that was not of your making. D only provides for the offending licensee to pay for a negligible cost of disposal. I'd like to see that heavier. Like, Moon Mix, for example. We had $20,000 worth of product on our shelves. We're out that money. That should be on the bad actor in the context of a recall. I think that they should bear all costs borne by all licensees, if not in addition to the department and the cost borne there. I mean, maybe a standard of reckless negligence or intentionality would be applied there, but in my opinion, D doesn't go far enough because I, as a dispensary owner, have nothing to do with a product being unsafe and being recalled upstream, but I bear all that cost. Right now, the only thing we don't have to bear is disposal cost, negligible.
I'm not sure if a government agency would be responsible for civil action between 2 private parties.
I'm not necessarily suggesting that. I'm suggesting that we expand the cost for disposal to include costs borne by licensees that are required by C. Like we have to do all these things, CI through, or 1 through 6. We have to do all these things, create lists, reach out to people, tell them what happened, get them all back in, send them all back up. We have to do all that and bear that cost. That should be on the offending licensee, in my opinion.
And I agree. I'm just not sure that's OMMA's purview to provide that. I think that's probably
cause of
an
action.
Yeah, I would tend to
Is there
agree.
anything that could be done statutorily or in the rules, I should say, to that end? I mean, if we're able to say that they should bear the cost of disposal, why can't we say they should bear the costs incurred by affected licensees?
For one, that would be virtually impossible to calculate, because I could all of a sudden claim that I was wronged and I need $100,000 as well. It could get into a whole bunch of stuff that would tie up a whole bunch of attorneys' time. And I see where you're going.
You're not wrong, but this to me reads like they are
wrongdoing.
expunged from all liability outside of getting rid of it, is how it reads to me.
Well, it's kind of like the food program.
They'd probably be expunged from maybe liability here at the Marijuana Authority, but definitely not from, civil liability. Not to mention, you're never at Peak or any other dispensary is never going to buy from them again, and then their reputation's probably going to be hampered.
That's my concern, is that a recall is a brand killer, definitively, meaning that our recourse is very limited, because they usually just bankrupt and they're gone. At least in the cases that it's happened here, that's largely been.
I think they're going to bankrupt and go home whether we put that in here or not. But if you have a recommendation, let's make that and try to keep moving.
Yeah, I don't necessarily. I just think I'd like to see this go further to hold them accountable.
Statute changes could possibly help you there.
Yeah.
So the next thing I have is just. That's way further down.
Did somebody say Adriel? Am I going crazy? Oh my
All right, the next thing I have are page 84. So again, changing records from 2 to 7 years record keeping requirements. That's just uniform throughout from statute. Then we also have that submissions of a COA into the state inventory tracking system is sufficient to meet the requirements to report and maintain those records. The next change is potency. Instead of terpenoid potency, we do terpenoid type and concentration. That's against statute. And since you'll have to test for each. Here we have the language that we kind of talked about earlier that says harvest batches that have failed microbial testing may be sent to a processor for decontamination of microbial contaminants and returned to the grower. And then a bigger addition here is the testing of non-infused pre-rolls in keef. And so I'll let y'all, does anybody have any comments on the testing requirements for pre-rolls and keef?
Just to clarify, so effectively what this is saying is that in the case of A, if there's like a homogenized, multiple harvest batches being used to create the pre-rolls, you have to test every 15. If they are not from multiple and only from a single, the growers' COAs are okay. Is that accurate?
Yes. Yes, that's what we're intending with this. With the exception of testing for heavy metals, filth and contaminants, and potency.
And just to make sure it's clear, the harvest batch testing requirements are still 15 pounds for items that will be sold as flour. So.
Do we need to clarify that the homogenized testing is specific to multiple harvest batches? Because reading it just beginning with the plant material must be homogenized. Is that clear enough, or does there need to be?
The second line on A says collected from multiple harvest batches. Is that still unclear?
It just stuck out to me. I don't need a recommendation on that.
Okay. So any other comments there? Or keep moving. Okay, perfect. The next change is from statute as well. So this now just provides that you must be accredited before you get licensed, and then also continuing renewal would be contingent on maintaining accreditation as well. So
this is similar to the other one, that it's not as of November 1 they have to get this certification. It's just upon renewal or an initial license.
Right.
Okay, thank you.
We have made changes per statute for the conflict of interest provisions, and so now a indirect beneficial owner has been stricken. And so essentially, the only requirement for a person that owns a lab is that they cannot test samples for any medical marijuana business in which an owner, employee, or agent of the medical marijuana testing laboratory has any form of ownership or financial interest in. So instead of you can't be an owner of any business, you can't be testing for any business you have any sort of financial interest in.
So an individual can own a testing laboratory and own another business license, grow, processing. They can test as long as they are they could even be a direct beneficial owner, or are they required to be an indirect beneficial owner that is allowed to own and be a part of the testing laboratory as well as another business license?
Well, I mean, that's direct beneficial owner is prohibited, but the indirect beneficial owner is.
So it looks to me like a direct beneficial owner cannot own a testing lab and also a processing or grow license. But an indirect beneficial owner could,
correct,
potentially do that. And a direct beneficial owner is only defined as one who owns a minimum percentage, and is it 30%? What was the
10%? I believe was the
10%. Okay, but there is no oversight or review of any contract documents, even though this indirect beneficial owner may have a contract, an administration contract that allows that person or entity to receive 99% of the profits produced from that company.
What's the question? No, don't repeat all of that. Like, what's the base question?
So an indirect beneficial owner could actually have a contract, a management contract, in which they get 99% of the profits generated by a processing company or a grower and still own a lab, testing laboratory.
Or the way I read this is that you just can't test anything that you have.
Right.
Right.
So if I had a grow and a lab, I would have to send my grow stuff to my friend's lab instead of to my own. Would be the way I would interpret this.
Correct.
But I think you're getting more into breaking down who actually gets the paycheck at the end of it too, which that.
And it does apply. So any owner, any employee, I mean, you shouldn't be testing for that. Yeah, I know. And so, yeah. Okay, the next changes, record keeping changes. I have page 94. Okay, there we go. Go up. So this is just clarifying that now dispensaries technically might have samples because of the pre-roll. So adding dispensaries there.
What exactly is a sampler?
Can you scroll to that section? We actually have, we have a definition of a sampler. So it's not there's no designated type of person that's a sampler. Essentially, it can be anybody, including an employee of a grower or processor and now a dispensary.
A sampler is defined as a person employed by an owner of a licensed lab, grower, processor, and authorized by the employer to collect samples in accordance with the testing laboratories.
My main clarification there is just confirming that this does not need to be an employee of the lab or a state employee, correct?
That is correct.
Okay, thank you.
Of a final medical marijuana product batch, which is in Appendix D, and then also we've added a new Appendix E for representative samples of non-infused pre-rolls. And we can just wait to get down there. So this next change came from 63 OS 427.4, just again clarifying that licensees who provide samples or units of medical marijuana products are at its own expense, but they are not responsible for the cost of the testing. So our QA lab and the state will cover those costs. And then also, the next change is just clarifying state inventory tracking system instead of all the other verbiage. The next change is page 105. So there has been also a change in how to measure the distance between a waste facility and a school. And it's the nearest front entrance of the facility to the nearest entrance of the school, or from any entrance of the school. So that's going to be different than for dispensaries, but that's what statute has provided. Okay, so the other changes are going to be on page 124. We've added some penalties. Penalties just from statute. Inaccurate reporting now is $5,000 for the first violation, $10,000 for any additional violation, and there's also going to be revocation that comes into play there for the willful and gross violation.
So these penalties for inaccurate reporting, they could be because I classified something as, I've got all of it on there.
So these type of penalties are going to apply more to the gross inaccuracies where you have basically fraudulent reporting to us. And so just misrepresenting completely what type of product they have and those type of examples.
So Mike, I'm looking back to the section that it references here, the 56.1B. It's within any 2-year period of time, there have been one or more reports containing gross errors that cannot reasonably be attributed to normal human error.
So that sort of was leading to my next question, which, okay, so they did something inaccurate in January. Well, somewhere in June, someone catches on and figures out they got something in the wrong box in January. Now these mistakes have carried forward on every single month until June. Now they have 6 violations, or maybe that one item inaccurate, inadvertently put in the wrong box now is 12 or 24 violations because it compounded as the weeks and months went on. Would they be subject to these additional violation penalties at that point, and how would that be viewed by the department?
Well, the standard in statute is willful or grossly negligent.
So
that, and I was going to say that, but it's very difficult to determine willful, as you all, I mean, certainly aware.
kind of violation you're talking about some more like that would be able to be corrected, and so given that interview type situation.
So we're talking really about bad actors here. We're not talking about someone who inadvertently, and I kind of wanted to make that point, that this is not for inadvertent, even though it says inaccurate. This is some willful intent that people are actually doing something to hide and cover things up.
Correct.
And Cameron, also that would actually only apply if you were taken to administrative court and lost, and they said, yeah, you owe $5,000, right?
Correct.
So you still get to go through the whole hearing and defend yourself.
Absolutely.
So.
And all the violations, this whole table is basically the same. He's talking about inaccurate reporting, but they're all basically the same thing. Gross negligence, I guess you see alcohol. I guess I got in trouble for something, but not just, we walk in and there's, but it's gross negligence.
Right. Our compliance department actually tries to work with folks first and give suggestions on how to fix violations if they're not reaching the level of willful or grossly negligent.
Well, that was something I was going to say, and I'm day 2, so take this with a grain of salt. But, it's my understanding that you're going to have 30 days to go back in and correct this. Well, your 30 days starts when we tell you that you have 30 days to go back in and change it. I don't think the negligence or the gross negligence is going to happen until you continue to keep reporting wrong after we've educated you. Because our goal is to come in and educate you and show you what you've done wrong. And you're not going to do it the next time. Our goal is to get the bad actors. So I don't think that's anything you'll have a problem with.
And I guess my goal with that line of questioning was to reassure licensees that this is not something that they're going to make a teeny tiny mistake and get fined $40,000 because they goofed up and put something in a wrong box in January.
Right. Not unless they continue doing it.
Right. And so there is a lot of fear out there about that, and I was trying to help allay some of those fears.
Well, and to that point, it's a good point, and I would say that, to any licensees listening or watch the recording later, this table, the violations or offenses, however they frame it, really are just a one-liner summary of the theme. Really, you need to refer back to the citations that are on the third column and read those sections to understand better what is meant by inaccurate reporting. And as we've just seen, when we go back and look at that, it's gross negligence, intentionality, et cetera. So to reassure those listening, all these things, unless they are really bad and intentional, then, refer back to the statute or the rule that it's referencing, and that should give you clarification and help.
Do we want to make a motion to approve of what we've got before we lose our quorum?
We already have the approved motions. So those were done during quorum.
All right. So the next changes that we have are adding to the fine table diversions to unauthorized minors. First violation, $2,500, $5,000 as provided per statute. And again, that's going to be held to the similar types of standards. The next changes, we've added 2 appendixes as previously discussed for testing and sampling. The first, Appendix D, is sample collection for final medical marijuana products. I'll let y'all look at that if you have any comments.
Just quick clarification, I assume that these tables were pulled from general ISO sampling procedures.
They're based upon those. Actually, they're more based upon the ANSI AQL guidelines for representative sampling. I will fess up and make note that Colorado did the thinking on this for this particular one, but it's something I've been studying for quite some time to get better sampling schematics out there for the industry across the board.
Thank you.
But they are based upon, and those schematics are based upon statistical basis for certain number of defects. You need this number of sample increments collected.
All right, and then the next table is for pre-rolls. Any questions with any of that?
Yes, they did.
What would be the circumstance where we'd be making 250,000 pre-rolls in one production batch? Yeah. We're doing like fractional grams?
We've kind of learned to broaden our horizons with anything we put into rule and regulation. Along those lines, would it be appropriate for me to bring up something that I think may be misleading on these tables?
Please do.
I was looking at Cameron. Okay. If you will notice on the pre-rolls in particular, that final column says submit for a 2-gram pre-roll. The intention is not to limit a pre-roll to 2 grams. We really I should have said 2 grams or greater in that column.
Wouldn't it be appropriate to make a recommendation? This is a new section.
That is appropriate.
Lee, would you do the honors?
Well, let's
Can
have
I?
the board make the recommendation.
Yeah, I think it's the board that has to.
Okay. All right, recommendation per Lee's advice that we change the text in the far right column of Appendix E to read minimum number of pre-rolls to submit for a 2.00 gram or greater pre-roll.
I'll second.
The only change is 2.00 G or greater. Brian seconded. Yes. Thank you, Lee.
Okay, Appendix E, minimum number of pre-rolls to submit for a 2-gram pre-roll or greater. Adam Austin,
Yes.
Blake Cantrell,
Yes.
Brian Duzan,
Yes.
Christy Edelin,
Yes.
Mike Irvin, Wesley Holloway,
Yes.
Philip Drina,
Yes.
is absent. Caroline Nelson,
Yes.
motion carries.
Do we need the same on D, Lee? 100 servings or greater?
Yes, Kelly, that is correct. Similar circumstance with the final product sampling schematic.
Okay, per Lee, I'd like to make another recommendation to Appendix D, far right column, to change it to read minimum number of package units for a serving for a 100 or greater serving unit.
I will second.
Oh, reliable.
Will you say that again? Change to read minimum number of package for serving.
Minimum number of packaged units for a 100 or greater serving unit. Is that correct?
Greater is what they're looking at. Just to open it up so it's not definitive. Like on the pre-rolls, it said 2 grams. 2 grams or greater.
Brian.
That's 100 units per 100.
100 units per one.
Okay, this is the change for Appendix D. Adam Austin,
Yes.
Blake Cantrell,
Yes.
Brian Duzan,
Yes.
Christy Edelin,
Yes.
Mike Irvin,
Yes.
Wesley Holloway,
Yes.
Philip Jarina,
Yes.
Caroline Nelson.
Yes.
Motion passes.
That wraps up our changes, correct?
Yes.
Okay.
So with that, just want to make sure everybody is aware that our next meeting is scheduled for Monday, December 6th at 1 p.m. Currently, location is set at the auditorium at the Oklahoma Commons building, but pending appointment of an additional 8 members, it may change, and we will keep you in the loop on that. And with that, I'd like to call for a motion to dismiss. Once we have a second, we can break.
I'll make a motion to dismiss.
Okay, motion to dismiss Adam Austin.
Yes.
Blake Cantrell.
Yes.
Brian DeZan.
Yes.
Christy Edelin.
Yes.
Mike Irvin. Wesley Holloway.
Yes.
Philip Jarina.
Yes.
Caroline Nelson.
Yes.
Okay, meeting adjourned. It is 12:34.
A lot of arguing over one word here.
Very trivial.
You know, sometimes that one word means, and some of it, you know, because I'm a bad person, you know, start talking about that, I'm like,
Yeah, what does that matter?
I don't, you know.
Bring me your samples.
Yeah.
No, for sure. It's definitely a few trivial items, but interpretation matters.
And that's the problem with a lot of it is that, you know, we deal with a lot of people, and they will come in and swear, no, it means this. I'm like,